Grateful and Company presents Mastering Self-Talk, One Mental Habit That Rewires Your Brain in 3 Days. Written and produced by Sincerely Grateful. Dedication. This book is for the ones who think too much and still feel like they don't know enough. For the midnight overthinkers with 20 open tabs and a sinking sense that they're missing something. It's for those quietly fighting through decision fatigue, information overload, imposter syndrome, and the haunting feeling that despite all the podcasts, self-help books, and productivity hacks, they're still stuck. It's a tribute to the quiet whispers of resilience within us all, to those fleeting but powerful moments of inner clarity that pierce through the noise of modern life. It's a testament to the astonishing adaptability of the human brain, its ability to rewire, recalibrate, and rebuild a life rooted in clarity, purpose, and peace. This book is for the black sheep waking up in a world that often feels rigged. For those who've seen through the noise, the influencers, the empty hype, the overpriced mental clarity boot camps, and who are now searching for something real. It's for the quietly rebellious thinkers who no longer want to just consume content, but actually live with intention. It's also for anyone who has felt overwhelmed by their own thoughts, who has doubted their worth, and yet, despite everything, still harbors a flicker of belief that change is possible. You don't need a guru. You don't need another to-do list. What you need is the truth. Your mind is not broken. It's just been programmed by the wrong inputs. I wrote this book for a younger version of myself, the me who was drowning in distractions, chasing clarity but sabotaging momentum. This book is a message to that self, and maybe to you. There is another way. A way that's grounded in neuroscience, but also in grace, in focus, but also in forgiveness, in the courage to question everything, especially your own thoughts. Let this book be a compass, not to tell you where to go, but to remind you that you're not crazy, and you're not alone. That your struggle to think clearly, live authentically, and break free from mental noise is not just valid, it's the very sign that you're on the right path. But before we talk about tools or frameworks or transformation, let me show you what it feels like when the internal noise finally takes over, when the system breaks. Because it happened to me, and everything changed the moment I heard that voice for the very first time. Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. The fluorescent lights of the boardroom hummed, a relentless counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of Alex's heart. He stood at the podium, the polished mahogany a cold comfort beneath his trembling hands. The PowerPoint presentation, meticulously crafted over weeks, blurred at the edges, the words swimming before his eyes like frantic goldfish. He'd rehearsed this presentation countless times, each word etched into his memory. Yet now, faced with the expectant gaze of the board, his mind went blank, a terrifying void replacing the carefully constructed narrative. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing down on his chest like a physical weight. His breath hitched in his throat, shallow and ragged, each gasp a desperate struggle for oxygen. A wave of nausea rolled over him, a sickening churn in his stomach that threatened to send him reeling. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temples, a cold, clammy film against his skin. The hushed murmurs of the board members, normally a background hum, amplified into a deafening roar in his ears, each whispered comment a potential judgment, a confirmation of his inadequacy. His internal monologue, a relentless torrent of self-deprecation, accelerated with the pounding of his heart. "You're going to fail," a voice hissed in his mind, sharp and accusatory. "They'll see right through you. You're a fraud, a complete and utter failure." The words, familiar and insidious, burrowed deep, reinforcing the mounting panic. He felt the familiar tightening in his throat, the cold dread spreading like a creeping vine through his veins. The meticulously planned presentation, the product of countless sleepless nights and grueling workdays, suddenly felt insignificant, irrelevant. All that mattered was escaping this suffocating pressure, this intense scrutiny. His carefully constructed professional persona, the mask he wore daily to navigate the corporate world, threatened to shatter, revealing the vulnerable, terrified man beneath. The room seemed to tilt, the faces of the board members morphing into indistinct shapes, swirling in a dizzying vortex. The air grew thinner, the light harsher, the silence deafening, except for the relentless pounding of his own heart, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. his vision tunneled, his focus narrowing to the single terrifying reality of his impending collapse. He felt a desperate need to escape, to flee the suffocating intensity of the situation, to run and hide from the judgment that felt imminent. He grasped the edge of the podium, his knuckles white, his body trembling violently, his legs felt weak, threatening to buckle beneath him. He desperately tried to regain control, to summon the composure he'd always prided himself on. But the panic was a runaway train, gathering momentum with each terrifying second. He wanted to scream, to shout, to break free from the invisible bonds that held him captive, but his voice seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the suffocating fear. His throat constricted further, making the already shallow breaths harder to take. He wanted nothing more than to disappear, to melt into the polished floor and escape the intense scrutiny that was now crushing his spirit. This wasn't just nerves, this was something far more profound. A deep-seated terror that burrowed beneath the surface of his carefully constructed life. Years of relentless pressure, of striving for perfection, of burying his doubts and insecurities beneath a facade of success, finally culminated in this explosive eruption of fear. It was the breaking point. A lifetime of unspoken anxieties and repressed emotions manifested in this terrifying physical and mental manifestation. The boardroom, a symbol of his ambition and success, suddenly represented the cage of his own making. The image of his father's disappointed face flashed before his eyes, a stark reminder of past failures and the unrelenting pressure he'd felt to meet impossibly high expectations. He remembered the relentless competition, the constant striving for approval, the gnawing self-doubt that had plagued him for years. His carefully crafted life of success had felt like running on a treadmill, running faster and faster, trying to keep up, trying to prove himself worthy, always falling short in his own eyes. This moment, this devastating panic attack, was a reckoning, a stark reminder of the deep-seated cracks in his seemingly impenetrable armor. The polished exterior was a fragile shell, barely containing the turmoil within. He felt a wave of dizziness, the boardroom swaying, the faces blurring into a nauseating kaleidoscope of judgment and expectation. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable collapse. Then, amidst the chaos, a whisper. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, yet strangely powerful, distinct from the roaring in his ears and the frantic hammering of his heart. It was a whisper of calm, a soft, reassuring voice that seemed to come from deep within. Not the accusatory voice of his self-doubt, but something else, a gentle, soothing presence. It said only one thing, a simple phrase: "You are safe." The words landed like a miracle, and in that instant, something began to shift, physically, emotionally, chemically. He didn't understand it yet, but it was real. And if that whisper hadn't come when it did, what would have happened next? The whisper, barely audible above the frantic pounding of his own heart, was a lifeline in the maelstrom of his fear. It wasn't a booming command, nor a judgmental critique, but a gentle, soothing murmur, a quiet acknowledgement of his suffering. "You are safe," it repeated, the words settling into the churning chaos like a drop of oil, calming troubled waters. The physical effects were almost instantaneous, a subtle but undeniable shift in his physiology. The ferocious tightening in his chest began to ease, the air, once suffocating, became breathable. His ragged breathing, shallow and gasping, gradually deepened, slowing into a more regular rhythm. The nausea, a sickening churn in his stomach, slowly subsided, replaced by a dull ache that felt manageable, even bearable. The dizziness, the room tilting and swaying, gradually ceased, the blurry images of the board members solidifying into distinct, less menacing figures. It wasn't a sudden cessation of all symptoms. It was a gradual unwinding, a gentle release of the tension that had gripped him. It was as if a powerful, invisible hand had slowly loosened its grip, allowing him to exhale, to let go of the suffocating fear. The sweat on his forehead, previously a cold, clammy film, began to recede, the chill replaced by a mild warmth. His trembling body, rigid with fear, started to relax, the tremors diminishing until only a slight quiver remained. The internal monologue, a relentless torrent of self-criticism and self-doubt, also began to quiet. The accusatory voices, once a deafening chorus, slowly faded into the background. their sharp, accusatory tones muffled by the reassuring whisper. The internal landscape, previously a tempestuous sea of negativity, began to calm, the turbulent waves subsiding into a gentler, calmer expanse. The whisper, that quiet, persistent reassurance, had created a sanctuary within the storm, a small island of peace amidst the raging tempest. The contrast between the external world and his inner experience was striking, almost surreal. The boardroom, with its harsh fluorescent lights and the expectant judging faces, remained a scene of high-pressure tension. Yet within him, a surprising tranquility had taken root. It was as if he'd stepped through a portal, leaving behind the chaos of the external world for the calm refuge of his inner sanctuary. This inner calm wasn't an escape. It was a profound shift in perception, a new lens through which he could view his reality. This inner voice, this unexpected source of calm, felt deeply personal, intimate. It wasn't the voice of a friend or mentor offering external advice, but a voice originating from within, a quiet, compassionate witness to his suffering. It wasn't judging or correcting, merely acknowledging and reassuring. It was an act of radical self-compassion, a quiet rebellion against the harsh internal critic that had dominated his self-perception for so long. He opened his eyes slowly, cautiously, still unsure of his footing. The board members were still there, their faces still etched with a mixture of concern and expectation. Yet their presence no longer felt menacing, their silence no longer oppressive. The threat of judgment had lessened, the weight of their expectations reduced to a manageable hum. He was still in the boardroom, still facing the same situation, but something had fundamentally changed within him. He was no longer at the mercy of the panic. He had found a foothold, a center of calm amidst the storm. He looked down at the podium, his gaze resting on the same unassuming pen he had noticed moments earlier. Now, however, it didn't represent the anxiety of the impending presentation, but the unexpected power of his inner voice, a tangible symbol of resilience and hope. The pen, in its ordinariness, reflected the simple yet profound message that had saved him. You are safe. The experience was transformative, a pivotal moment in Alex's life. He felt shaken, vulnerable, yet strangely empowered. The panic attack had been a profound disruption, a harrowing experience that had exposed the deep-seated cracks in his armor. Yet, within this disruption, he had discovered an unexpected resilience, an inner strength he had never known he possessed. The immediate aftermath of the attack was a lingering sense of awe, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He had been on the verge of a complete breakdown, overwhelmed by fear and self-doubt, yet a simple whisper, a quiet inner voice, had pulled him back from the precipice. The contrast between the internal and external worlds was stark, a reminder of the power of internal resources, of the capacity for self-regulation even in the most stressful circumstances. And yet, as the adrenaline faded and he settled into the surreal calm that followed, one question wouldn't let him go. Where did that voice come from? And could it be summoned again? The lingering tremor in his hands was a physical manifestation of the emotional earthquake he'd just experienced. The boardroom, once a symbol of ambition, now felt like a battlefield. Yet the victory wasn't external, it resided in the surprising calm that had settled within him, a calm that defied the external chaos. The questions that haunted him now weren't born of fear, but of a burgeoning curiosity, a desire to understand the mechanics of his own miraculous recovery. He retreated to the sanctuary of his apartment, the familiar walls offering a sense of comfort. The city's cacophony, usually a source of irritation, faded into a muted hum, its noise replaced by the quiet intensity of his own thoughts. He sat at his desk, the mahogany surface cool beneath his fingertips, the pen he'd clutched so tightly during the presentation now lying discarded, a silent testament to his near collapse. He opened his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his face, as he began his research. His search began with a simple query. Inner voice, calm. The results were a mix of spiritual practices, self-help articles, and scientific studies. The scientific papers initially seemed impenetrable, filled with jargon that made his head spin. But as he persevered, a unifying theme began to emerge: neuroplasticity. The term itself felt significant, resonating with the shift he'd experienced. Neuroplasticity. The word rolled around in his mind, a revelation. It wasn't just a scientific concept. It was a mirror reflecting his own lived experience. He was learning that the brain, far from being a static organ, was a dynamic entity, constantly adapting, rewiring, and reshaping itself in response to experiences. He envisioned his brain as a lump of clay, its form molded by the relentless hands of his thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The negative self-talk, the crippling self-doubt, these were the forces that had shaped his brain into a form susceptible to panic. The boardroom, the looming presentation, were merely the sculptor's tools, shaping that clay into a vessel of anxiety and fear. But the whisper, the sudden calm, that was different. That was a new force, a new sculptor, reshaping the very clay of his being. It hadn't magically erased the negative experiences, but had created a new layer, a new structure, capable of resisting the negative force. It was a testament to the inherent resilience of the human brain, a dynamic force constantly responding to the external stimuli as well as internal self-direction. He read about Hebb's law, the principle that neurons that fire together wire together. He understood now that the relentless negativity, the self-criticism, had forged strong neural pathways, reinforcing his anxious tendencies. But the sudden calm, the reassuring whisper, had begun to forge new pathways. Pathways of self-compassion, pathways of resilience. He learned about mirror neurons, the cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that action. He realized that his internal voice, that whisper of calm, was a reflection of his capacity for self-compassion, a capacity he could actively cultivate and strengthen. He explored the research on mindfulness meditation, its ability to strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, self-regulation, and conscious control. He saw the connection to his own experience. The whisper wasn't a passive occurrence, it was the result of a conscious effort, even if unconscious at that moment, of self-regulation. The science wasn't merely theoretical, it felt profoundly personal. He saw his own experience reflected in the research papers, the brain scans, the neurological pathways. It was a tangible confirmation of what he had sensed instinctively. The brain's capacity for change, its incredible plasticity. He felt a surge of excitement, a newfound sense of agency. He wasn't simply a victim of his own biology. He was an active participant in its shaping. The concept of neuroplasticity wasn't merely an abstract notion, it was a practical tool. He understood that the negative self-talk, the harsh internal critic, wasn't an immutable part of his identity, but a pattern of neural firing that could be altered. The repetition of the negativity was shaping his brain, strengthening these pathways of fear. But by actively changing his thoughts and replacing them with positive affirmation, he could create new pathways, rewire his brain to approach situations with calm and self-assurance. His brain wasn't fixed, he could shape it, mold it, like that lump of clay. He spent hours immersing himself in the scientific literature, drawing connections between the research and his personal experience. He learned about the role of neurotransmitters, like dopamine and serotonin, in mood regulation. He understood how chronic stress depleted these chemicals, contributing to anxiety and depression. But he also learned about the brain's capacity to increase their production through positive experiences, positive self-talk, and mindfulness practices. The research wasn't just intellectual, it was deeply empowering. He realized that his brain wasn't a victim of its past, but a dynamic system capable of adapting and growing. It wasn't a machine, subject to inevitable deterioration, but a living, evolving organ, responding to his actions and thoughts. He wasn't just a passive recipient of his experiences, he could actively shape his future. The more he learned, the more he realized the profound implications of neuroplasticity. It wasn't just about overcoming panic attacks, it was about reshaping every aspect of his life. His relationships, his career, his sense of self, all could be transformed by harnessing the power of his own brain. He imagined the neural pathways in his brain, complex and intricate, like a vast network of interconnected roads. The negative self-talk had created heavily trafficked highways of negativity, making it easy for anxious thoughts to travel quickly throughout his brain. But by actively cultivating positive thoughts and self-compassion, he could create new roads, alternative routes, diverting traffic away from the congested highways of negativity. The more he used these new pathways, the stronger and more established they would become, gradually transforming the landscape of his mind. The constant self-soothing affirmations, similar to the whisper of calm during the panic attack, were now intentional routes to be consciously constructed. He saw the process as a long-term project, a journey of self-discovery and self-improvement. It wasn't a quick fix or a magic bullet, but a consistent practice, a daily commitment to reshaping his internal world. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight, but it was a journey that filled him with hope, a journey of self-directed neuroplasticity. This wasn't just about reacting, this was about the power of active, intentional control over his own mind. The breaking point had become a launchpad. He had found his own self-propelled journey toward resilience. But could he turn discovery into discipline and sustain the change long enough for it to become who he was? The laptop screen glowed, illuminating the determined set of Alex's jaw. He'd spent the last few hours lost in the labyrinthine world of neuroscience, a world that suddenly felt intensely personal. Neuroplasticity wasn't just a scientific concept anymore. It was a lifeline, a pathway to a future less burdened by anxiety. He'd found a 3-day protocol, a structured approach to rewiring his brain, a plan of attack against the entrenched negativity that had held him captive for so long. A nervous energy thrummed beneath his skin, a mixture of apprehension and a burgeoning sense of hope. This wasn't just about reading research papers, this was about action, about actively shaping his own brain. The protocol was deceptively simple, consisting of 3 core techniques. The first, second-person self-talk. It felt counterintuitive at first. Instead of the usual inner monologue, the self-critical voice he'd grown accustomed to, he was to address himself as you. He was to treat himself as a separate entity, offering support and understanding rather than condemnation. He read about the underlying neuroscience, the way this approach could decouple the emotional reactivity of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, from the rational processing of the prefrontal cortex. It was like creating a healthy distance between the observer and the observed, allowing him to analyze his thoughts and feelings without being swept away by them. He began that very evening, sitting on his balcony, the city lights a shimmering backdrop to his self-experiment. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began. "You are feeling overwhelmed," he said softly, the words sounding strange, yet strangely comforting. "You are experiencing anxiety, but that is temporary. It will pass. You are strong. You are resilient. You can handle this." He repeated these affirmations, each repetition strengthening the neural pathways associated with self-compassion and self-assurance. It felt awkward at first, almost childish, but with each repetition, the words resonated deeper, chipping away at the hardened layers of self-criticism. The second technique involved crafting identity-based statements. This wasn't about positive thinking in the superficial sense. It was about consciously constructing a narrative that aligned with the person he wanted to become, the person he knew he could be. He was to create affirmations that reflected his desired qualities, not as mere aspirations, but as declarations of his existing identity. He spent time reflecting on his strengths, on moments of resilience and courage, on instances where he'd overcome challenges. He wrote down these statements, phrases that embodied his ideal self. "I am resourceful. I am capable. I am calm under pressure. I am confident in my abilities." These weren't empty boasts. They were carefully constructed affirmations designed to strengthen the neural pathways supporting those attributes. These were statements designed to sculpt his brain, to mold the neural clay of his being into the form of the person he envisioned. The neuroscience behind this technique was equally fascinating. The constant repetition of these affirmations, the consistent reinforcement of positive self-image, was akin to sculpting the physical structure of his brain. It was about strengthening the connections between neurons, forging new pathways that supported self-confidence and resilience. It was a powerful reminder that identity wasn't a static entity, but a dynamic construct, one that he could actively shape and refine. This self-directed neuroplasticity was not just a concept, it was a project, a constant building and sculpting of his self. The third technique, labeling negative thoughts, was perhaps the most challenging. It involved observing negative thoughts and emotions without judgment, simply labeling them as thoughts, not as facts. This was a subtle but significant shift in perspective. It involved recognizing that thoughts were not inherent truths, but merely mental events, fleeting phenomena that didn't necessarily define him. He would say to himself, "This is anxiety," or "This is a negative thought," rather than letting it engulf him. This was crucial, he realized, because his negative self-talk wasn't just a series of unpleasant thoughts. It was a self-perpetuating cycle. By labeling these thoughts and emotions, he was disrupting that cycle, creating a space between the thought and his reaction to it. This space was crucial. It was the space where he could choose a different response, a response rooted in self-compassion and understanding, rather than being swept away by the negativity. The neuroscience here focused on the prefrontal cortex's role in executive functioning and self-regulation. He was learning to strengthen his prefrontal cortex by consciously choosing how to respond, rather than reacting automatically. This was his conscious effort to construct a new neural highway. Day one of the protocol began with apprehension. He found himself retreating to his familiar routines, the comfortable patterns of his life. He started with the second-person self-talk during his morning commute, the city's rush-hour chaos, a stark contrast to the calm he sought to cultivate. The words felt stilted at first, but as he repeated them, a subtle shift occurred. The usual anxiety that accompanied the daily grind seemed less potent, less all-consuming. During his lunch break, he practiced the identity-based statements, whispering them to himself as he ate. "I am resourceful. I am capable. I am calm under pressure." The words felt like a mantra, a repetition designed to create new neural pathways, to reshape the landscape of his mind. In the afternoon, during a particularly stressful meeting, he found himself employing the third technique, labeling his anxious thoughts. "This is anxiety," he thought. "This is just a thought. It's not a fact." The labels themselves became a kind of anchor, grounding him in the present moment. He noticed the anxiety, acknowledged it, but didn't let it dictate his actions. Day two found him incorporating the protocol into different aspects of his life. While exercising, he focused on second-person self-talk, praising his efforts and acknowledging his progress. While preparing dinner, he repeated his identity-based statements, imbuing them with a quiet confidence. And throughout the day, he continued to label his negative thoughts, observing them without judgment. On day three, he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The protocol wasn't just a set of exercises, it had become a way of life. He felt a growing confidence, a sense of agency, a belief in his capacity for change. The apprehension he'd felt initially had largely dissipated, replaced by a quiet determination. He understood that this wasn't a quick fix, but a continuous process of self-sculpting, a journey of self-directed neuroplasticity, but he felt hopeful. He knew there would be setbacks, moments of doubt and anxiety, but he also knew that he had the tools to overcome those challenges, that he had the capacity to reshape his brain, to create a life less burdened by fear and self-doubt. He was actively participating in the sculpting of his own mind, a conscious effort of self-creation, a voyage from the breaking point to a place of newfound strength and resilience. He had begun his journey toward a more confident, resilient, and empowered version of himself, a version of himself he was actively building, brick by brick, thought by thought, neuron by neuron. The 3-day protocol was just the beginning of a lifelong project of self-directed neuroplasticity. It was a beginning that filled him with a quiet, determined hope. But would it hold when life pushed back harder than a protocol could prepare him for? The first day wasn't a triumphal march towards self-mastery, it was more like a clumsy shuffle through a minefield of ingrained habits. The second-person self-talk, initially awkward and stilted, felt like wearing someone else's skin. "You are feeling overwhelmed," I whispered to myself on the crowded subway, the words a fragile raft in a sea of rushing commuters and honking taxis. The familiar anxiety, a constant companion, still clawed at the edges of my awareness. The inner critic, that relentless voice of self-doubt, didn't simply vanish, it merely took a back seat, muttering its criticisms from the shadows. The words felt hollow, a performance rather than a genuine expression of self-compassion. I caught myself lapsing back into the first person, the familiar "I'm a failure, I can't do this," whispering like insidious vines in my mind. Lunch brought another challenge, the identity-based affirmations. I am resourceful, I am capable, I am calm under pressure, felt like hollow pronouncements, a desperate attempt to convince myself of a truth I didn't yet believe. The words echoed in my mind, devoid of genuine conviction. I felt ridiculous, like an actor reciting lines from a script he didn't understand. The skepticism gnawed at me, whispering doubts in my ear. "You're fooling yourself," it hissed. "This won't work." The internal battle raged, a war between the nascent voice of self-acceptance and the entrenched army of self-doubt. It was a battle fought not on a grand battlefield, but in the quiet confines of my own mind. A relentless internal conflict that left me emotionally exhausted. The afternoon brought a particularly stressful meeting, a tempest of conflicting opinions and deadlines. The anxiety, a familiar tidal wave, threatened to engulf me. I tried to apply the third technique, labeling my thoughts. This is anxiety. This is just a thought. It's not a fact. The words, however, offered only fleeting respite. The emotional intensity was too strong. The labeling felt like a feeble attempt to dam a raging river with a twig. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my palms sweating, the familiar tightening in my throat, a stark reminder of my vulnerability. I managed to navigate the meeting, but the experience felt like a defeat. A stark reminder that this wasn't some quick fix, but a grueling marathon of self-transformation. That evening, exhausted and discouraged, I almost abandoned the entire project. The initial euphoria had evaporated, replaced by a wave of disillusionment. The protocol felt ineffective, my efforts futile. I was tempted to retreat to the comfortable familiarity of self-criticism, the only companion I'd known for years. But something stopped me. A faint whisper of hope, a tenacious ember amidst the ashes of my discouragement. I remembered the research, the scientific evidence behind neuroplasticity. I remembered that change wasn't instantaneous, that rewiring the brain was a gradual process, a slow but persistent sculpting of neural pathways. I had to be patient. I had to persevere. The affirmations sounded good in theory, but deep down, a question pulsed beneath every whispered phrase. What happens when the voice of hope collides with the weight of habit? Chapter 2. The Inner Coach. The third day began with a renewed sense of purpose. The initial awkwardness of addressing myself as you had faded, replaced by a growing comfort, a sense of gentle detachment from the swirling vortex of my own anxieties. It was as if I'd stepped back from the stage of my own internal drama, observing the performance with a newfound clarity. This wasn't about silencing the inner critic, it was about creating space, a buffer zone between the negative thoughts and my core sense of self. My morning commute, previously a source of considerable stress, became a surprisingly tranquil experience. Instead of allowing the usual anxieties to consume me, the rush of the crowd, the screeching of brakes, the fear of missing my train, I addressed each stressful element with a calm second-person observation. "You are feeling rushed, but you are also capable of navigating this situation," I whispered to myself, the words a quiet mantra against the cacophony of city noise. It was as if I was providing myself with a reassuring commentary, a running narrative that contextualized my experience rather than simply reacting to it. The neuroscience behind this, I reflected, was fascinating. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function and self-regulation, was engaging in a form of cognitive reappraisal. By addressing myself as you, I was creating a psychological distance, allowing my prefrontal cortex to step back and analyze my emotional responses without being overwhelmed by them. It was like watching a movie of my own emotions, observing them with a measure of clinical detachment. This detachment, I discovered, was not emotionally sterile, it was empowering. It allowed me to access a reservoir of resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The feelings were still there, the anxiety, the frustration, the pressure, but they no longer held me captive. I could observe them, name them, and ultimately choose how to respond to them. It wasn't about suppressing my emotions, but about gaining control over my relationship with them. The day brought a particularly challenging work issue. A major project was facing unexpected setbacks, and the pressure was mounting. My colleagues were anxious, their frustration palpable. In the past, I would have allowed the tension to consume me, leading to impulsive reactions and ultimately more problems. But this time, something was different. I noticed the tightening in my chest, the familiar onset of anxiety. Instead of reacting immediately, I paused, taking a deep breath. "You are feeling stressed," I said quietly to myself. "This is understandable, but you are also capable of handling this situation. You have faced challenges before, and you have always found a way to overcome them." The simple act of addressing myself in the second person created a small but crucial space between stimulus and response. It allowed me to access my problem-solving skills, to analyze the situation with a clear head, and to formulate a plan of action. The conversation with my colleagues was more productive, more collaborative. I remained calm, measured, and focused, guiding the team toward a constructive solution. The meeting ended not in chaos and frustration, but in a sense of collaborative problem-solving. The success of the meeting wasn't merely a matter of chance. It was a direct result of consciously applying the second-person self-talk. It allowed me to regulate my emotional response, improving my cognitive function and decision-making capabilities. The experience reinforced my understanding of the neuroscience at play. The act of separating the self from the emotion through the use of you allowed the more rational and executive functions of the brain to step in and take control. Later that afternoon, during a quiet moment at my desk, I delved deeper into the research behind this technique. The studies I reviewed confirmed what I was experiencing. Second-person self-talk had been shown to reduce anxiety, improve self-compassion, and enhance self-regulation. It was as if addressing myself as you was a way of activating different neural pathways, engaging the prefrontal cortex more effectively, and calming the amygdala, the brain's emotional center. The effect was not just psychological, the change extended to my physical state. My heart rate was slower, my breathing more relaxed. The physical sensations that usually accompanied my anxiety, the tightness in my chest, the tremor in my hands, were less pronounced. The body, it seemed, was responding to the changes in my mind. This wasn't simply a mental exercise, it was a holistic transformation that touched every aspect of my being. As the day progressed, the second-person self-talk became increasingly integrated into my thoughts and actions. It wasn't a conscious effort anymore. It was a natural, intuitive response to stress or discomfort. It was as if a new neural pathway was being created, a route that bypassed the old patterns of negative self-talk and accessed a more resourceful, resilient part of myself. That evening, I reflected on my progress. The journey had been challenging, a constant negotiation between old habits and new patterns. But the gradual, incremental change was undeniable. The small victories, the calmer commute, the productive meeting, the reduced physical symptoms of anxiety were building upon each other, creating a ripple effect of positive change. The process wasn't always smooth. There were moments of relapse, times when the old patterns of self-criticism tried to reassert themselves. But now I possessed the tools to recognize these patterns, to label them as mere thoughts, not facts, and to redirect my focus to a more compassionate and understanding inner voice. The second-person perspective, once a novelty, had become a lifeline. It was a way of talking to myself, not as a judge, but as a friend, a guide, and a compassionate observer. As I prepared for bed, I realized that the second-person self-talk wasn't just a therapeutic technique. It was a powerful tool for personal growth. It was a method for building a healthier, more resilient self, one that was better equipped to navigate life's inevitable challenges. It was a way of rewriting my internal narrative, of creating a story where self-compassion, resilience, and a quiet sense of self-assurance were the leading characters. The transformation had only just begun, but the path forward felt clearer, brighter, and filled with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. The whispers of doubt had become a murmuring undercurrent, easily navigated by the stronger currents of self-acceptance and strength. I had learned to listen to the power of you, and it was finally listening back. The quiet confidence that bloomed within was a testament to the transformative power of neuroplasticity, expertly wielded through the simple yet potent tool of second-person self-talk. Still, one question lingered as I drifted off to sleep. What would happen when this new voice had to confront my old life in full? The following week blurred into a series of small victories. The second-person self-talk, once a conscious effort, became almost second nature. It wasn't a forced performance, it flowed effortlessly into my internal dialogue, a quiet, reassuring undercurrent beneath the surface of my thoughts. I found myself using it instinctively, not just during moments of stress, but throughout the day. For instance, I'd previously dreaded the casual Friday lunch meetings with colleagues. These gatherings, typically filled with light-hearted banter, often turned into a minefield of self-doubt for me. I'd scrutinize my contributions, worry about appearing foolish, and replay every awkward moment in my head for hours afterward. This week, though, something was different. As I sat down at the table, the familiar knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. But instead of letting the negative thoughts spiral, I paused, taking a deep breath. "You are feeling a little anxious," I whispered to myself. "That's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You are here to connect with your colleagues, not to impress them." The shift in perspective was subtle, yet profound. Instead of focusing on potential failures, I concentrated on the present moment, on engaging with my colleagues in a genuine way. The conversation flowed naturally. I laughed, shared stories, and genuinely enjoyed the interaction. Later, I found myself reflecting on the lunch, not with self-criticism, but with a sense of accomplishment. I had not only navigated the social interaction without the usual anxiety, but I'd actually enjoyed myself. This success wasn't limited to social settings. At work, I faced a particularly difficult client interaction. The client, known for his demanding nature and sharp criticism, was giving me feedback on a project proposal. In the past, such interactions would have filled me with dread. I would anticipate his criticism, anticipating failure, and ultimately my performance would reflect this negative self-perception. This time, as the client began to express his concerns, I focused on the second-person perspective. "You are feeling defensive," I whispered internally. "You want to justify your work, but remember that hearing this feedback is essential for refining this proposal. You are capable of adapting and improving based on this input." The result was a remarkable shift. I listened to his feedback with an open mind, reframing his criticism not as personal attacks, but as opportunities for improvement. Instead of becoming defensive or frustrated, I felt empowered to engage in a productive conversation. The encounter concluded not in conflict, but in a collaborative effort to refine the proposal. This moment of success was exhilarating. It wasn't merely about surviving a difficult interaction, it was about thriving despite the challenges. The impact of this reframing extended beyond my immediate surroundings. My sleep improved. The nightmares that had plagued me for months, filled with scenarios of failure and inadequacy, gradually lessened in intensity. The anxiety that had previously kept me awake for hours finally began to recede. My mornings felt lighter. The sense of dread I usually felt as I prepared for work dissipated. It was a ripple effect of calm that emanated outward, shaping my day from the moment I awoke until I went to sleep. The neurological changes, while subtle, were becoming increasingly apparent. I was becoming more aware of the way my brain responded to stress. I noticed how my breathing would become shallower, my heart rate increase, and a familiar tightness would constrict my chest. But now, instead of panicking, I could observe these physical responses without judgment. "You are experiencing a physical response to stress," I'd tell myself. "This is normal, and it will pass." The very act of labeling these sensations, recognizing them as physical responses rather than signs of impending doom, helped to lessen their intensity. The second-person self-talk became a tool for self-soothing, a way of calming my nervous system and bringing my body back into a state of equilibrium. I found myself engaging more in mindful activities, meditation, yoga, and even simply spending time in nature. These practices complemented the second-person self-talk, creating a synergistic effect that enhanced my emotional well-being and fostered a deeper sense of self-awareness. One evening, while walking home from work, I passed a group of young people playing basketball. Their laughter and energy brought back a wave of nostalgia and a pang of regret. "You used to enjoy sports as a child," I whispered to myself. "You loved the sense of community, the camaraderie, and the challenge. You can find that joy again." This simple acknowledgement sparked a newfound desire to reintroduce physical activity into my life. The next day, I signed up for a weekly yoga class. It wasn't about achieving physical perfection, It was about rediscovering the joy of movement and building a healthier relationship with my body. The experience served as a microcosm of my journey, a gentle reminder that it's never too late to embrace new challenges, to redefine our limitations, and to rediscover lost passions. This wasn't merely about overcoming anxiety or improving work performance. It was about a fundamental shift in my self-perception. I was no longer defining myself by my failures or my anxieties. I was creating a new identity, one based on resilience, self-compassion, and a growing sense of self-acceptance. The second-person self-talk was instrumental in this process, providing a safe space for self-reflection, self-encouragement, and the cultivation of a more positive and empowering internal dialogue. The improvement wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when the old patterns of negative self-talk would resurface. But now I had the tools to recognize these patterns, to label them as mere thoughts, not facts, and to redirect my focus towards a more compassionate and understanding inner voice. The second-person perspective became a shield against the barbs of self-criticism. It was like having a wise and compassionate friend whispering words of encouragement in the midst of a storm. I was learning to navigate my own internal landscape with greater skill and understanding. As I continued to use this technique, I began to understand its power on a deeper level. It wasn't merely about changing my thoughts. It was about altering the very neural pathways in my brain. The act of creating psychological distance through the use of you allowed my prefrontal cortex to engage more effectively, regulating the emotional responses originating in the amygdala. This wasn't just a mental exercise, it was a physical rewiring of my brain, a testament to the incredible plasticity of the human mind. It was a constant process, an ongoing dialogue between the old patterns and the new, a testament to the power of conscious self-direction. The more I practiced, the stronger the new pathways became. This created a ripple effect, improving every aspect of my life. My relationships deepened, my creativity flourished, and a quiet confidence took root within me. The journey, however, was far from over. It was an ongoing process of self-discovery, a continuous negotiation between old habits and new patterns. But armed with the tool of second-person self-talk and a newfound understanding of my own brain's capacity for change, I felt prepared to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that I had the power to reframe my narratives, to redefine my limitations, and to create a life defined by resilience, self-compassion, and unwavering self-belief. Still, there was one moment coming, one test I hadn't faced yet, and it would demand more than anything I'd practiced so far. The shift towards second-person self-talk wasn't just about managing stress. It was about cultivating a profound sense of self-compassion. It was like discovering a hidden wellspring of kindness within myself, a reservoir of empathy I could direct inward. Previously, my inner critic had been a relentless voice, a judge and jury constantly evaluating my performance and finding me wanting. Now, however, I was learning to replace that harsh judgment with gentle understanding. It was as if I was befriending myself, offering the same support and compassion I would readily extend to a dear friend struggling with similar challenges. This transition wasn't instantaneous, it was a gradual process, a delicate dance between old habits and new patterns. There were moments when the old critical voice would reassert itself, its familiar sting sharper than ever against the backdrop of newfound self-compassion. But those moments too became opportunities for growth. I learned to identify them not as failures, but as reminders that this was a continuous journey. One evening, after a particularly challenging day at work, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, the weight of my exhaustion settling heavily upon me. The familiar self-criticism started to creep in. You should have handled that differently. You could have been more prepared. You're not good enough. But this time, instead of allowing these thoughts to spiral, I paused. I took a deep breath and spoke to myself as I would to a dear friend in need. "You are feeling overwhelmed," I whispered softly. "That's okay. You did your best, and that's more than enough. You are allowed to feel tired, and you deserve rest." The words were simple, yet their impact was transformative. The harsh self-criticism dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of self-acceptance. It was as if a soothing balm had been applied to my weary soul, easing the burden of my self-doubt. I allowed myself to simply be, to acknowledge my exhaustion and my imperfections without judgment. It was a deeply liberating experience. I began to incorporate this practice into my daily routine. I started each morning with a few minutes of meditation, focusing on cultivating a feeling of loving kindness towards myself. It wasn't about achieving a state of blissful serenity, it was about creating a space for self-acceptance, for acknowledging my strengths and my weaknesses without judgment. I found myself using this second-person self-compassion in various aspects of my daily life. During a difficult conversation with a family member, instead of reacting defensively, I paused and said to myself, "You are feeling frustrated right now. It's okay to feel these emotions. Try to listen with an open heart and be mindful to communicate clearly without blame." This shift in perspective allowed me to navigate the conversation with greater empathy and understanding. The result was a more productive and less stressful interaction. At work, when faced with a difficult task, I approached it with self-compassion. "You are feeling anxious about this project," I'd remind myself. "That's natural. Break it down into smaller, more manageable steps and celebrate your small victories along the way." This self-encouragement, this gentle guidance, helped me approach the task not with dread, but with a sense of calm determination. I even started incorporating self-compassion into my physical exercise routine. Instead of beating myself up for not meeting some unrealistic fitness goal, I would say to myself, "You are doing your best. It is wonderful that you are exercising. Be kind to your body and appreciate the effort, not just the results." This shift in perspective transformed my relationship with exercise from one of self-criticism and punishment to one of self-care and self-love. The exercise became a way to nourish my body and mind, rather than a tool for self-flagellation. The benefits extended beyond the immediate context. My sleep quality improved dramatically. The nightmares, once vivid and recurring, faded away as I learned to treat myself with kindness and understanding. My overall mood shifted, becoming brighter and more optimistic. I started to notice the small joys in life, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the laughter of children, the beauty of a flower in bloom. I became more attuned to the present moment, less caught up in worries about the future or regrets about the past. I also found that this newfound self-compassion strengthened my relationships with others. By treating myself with greater kindness, I became more capable of extending that same kindness to those around me. My interactions became more authentic and genuine. I found myself listening more attentively, offering more empathy, and engaging in more meaningful connections. Self-compassion wasn't about self-indulgence or neglecting personal responsibility. It was about recognizing my inherent worthiness, irrespective of my imperfections. It was about creating a space for self-acceptance, for acknowledging that it's okay to be flawed, to make mistakes, and to experience difficult emotions. It was about remembering that I'm human, and that being human includes experiencing a full range of emotions, both positive and negative. It was a recognition of my intrinsic worth as a human being, regardless of successes or failures. The journey towards self-compassion was an ongoing process, one that required constant attention and self-reflection. There were times when the old patterns of self-criticism would re-emerge, but I now had the tools to recognize and redirect those thoughts. I learned to approach these moments with self-compassion, understanding that relapse is a natural part of any healing journey. Instead of punishing myself for these setbacks, I would pause, acknowledging the negative thoughts, and then gently redirect my attention toward a more compassionate and self-accepting perspective. This practice wasn't just a mental exercise, it was a physical rewiring of my brain. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt, became a tangible reality, evident in my improved mood, reduced anxiety, and enhanced sense of well-being. The consistent practice of second-person self-talk, coupled with the development of self-compassion, fostered positive neural pathways that strengthened my resilience and self-acceptance. The combination of the second person and the active cultivation of self-compassion strengthened these effects significantly. It was a profound journey of self-discovery, a testament to the remarkable capacity of the human mind to heal and transform. The quiet confidence that emerged from this process, the unshakable belief in my ability to navigate life's challenges with greater ease and compassion, was a hard-won prize, born from the simple yet revolutionary act of treating myself with the same kindness and understanding I would offer a cherished friend. It was a constant dialogue, a continuous process of self-reflection, but one filled with the quiet strength of self-compassion. The path forward wasn't always easy, but with each step, I felt a deeper sense of self-acceptance, a quiet confidence in my ability to navigate life's challenges with grace and resilience. And yet, for all the progress I had made, one persistent question remained, an unsettling echo beneath the surface of my healing. What if the critic was never mine to begin with? The relentless hum of self-criticism, a constant companion for as long as I could remember, felt like a persistent, low-grade fever. It wasn't the dramatic, explosive kind of self-doubt, rather a subtle, insidious erosion of self-worth. It whispered corrosive doubts in the quiet moments, a nagging voice that questioned my competence, my intelligence, even my very right to exist. It was a voice I'd grown accustomed to, a familiar discomfort I'd almost come to accept as part of my inherent being. But now, armed with the nascent understanding of second-person self-talk, I began to examine this insidious voice, to dissect its narratives and challenge its authority. My first attempts at self-compassion were clumsy, almost comical. The shift from the accusatory, "you're a failure," to the gentle, "you're feeling inadequate," felt forced, unnatural. It was like learning a new language, where the grammar felt awkward and the vocabulary limited. Yet with each hesitant utterance, I felt a slight shift within me, a subtle crack in the hardened shell of self-criticism. I started small, during a particularly stressful work meeting, when the familiar sting of self-doubt threatened to overwhelm me. I whispered to myself, "You're feeling pressured. That's understandable. Take a deep breath. You've handled difficult situations before. You can handle this." The effect was immediate, a wave of calm washing over me. It wasn't a magical erasure of the stress, but it was a significant reduction in the intensity of my negative self-talk. The next challenge came in the form of my physical appearance. For years, I'd carried a deep-seated insecurity about my body, constantly comparing myself to unrealistic ideals propagated by media and social circles. This internalized critique manifested as endless hours spent scrutinizing my reflection, picking apart perceived flaws, and fueling a relentless cycle of self-criticism. One morning, standing before the bathroom mirror, the old familiar patterns threatened to emerge. But this time I paused. Instead of succumbing to the usual self-deprecating commentary, I looked at myself with a different lens. I spoke to myself softly, "You're feeling self-conscious about your appearance. That's perfectly okay. Your body is strong and capable. It carries you through your daily life. Appreciate its strength and resilience." I focused on acknowledging my physical capabilities rather than dwelling on perceived imperfections. It was a start, a tiny rebellion against the established order of self-criticism. It wasn't just about the words themselves, it was about the tone, the empathy, the underlying message of acceptance. I started to notice the subtle shift in my body language as I spoke to myself in this compassionate way. My shoulders relaxed, my breathing deepened, and a sense of calm settled over me. This physical response reinforced the psychological effect, further solidifying the new pathway I was creating in my brain. The process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days when the old critical voice would roar back with renewed vigor. But each time I learned to approach these moments with greater understanding and patience. I saw them not as failures, but as opportunities to practice, to refine my skills in self-compassion. I learned to treat these episodes as data points, offering insights into the underlying insecurities and beliefs driving the negative self-talk. One evening, while working on a project that felt overwhelming, the self-criticism reached a fever pitch. "You're incompetent," it hissed. "You'll never finish this. You should just give up." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the familiar wave of panic rising, but this time I didn't let it sweep me away. Instead, I took a deep breath and said to myself, "You are feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. This is a challenging project, and it's okay to feel this way. It's acceptable to feel like you might fail, to feel inadequate. Acknowledge these feelings and separate them from your overall self-worth. Break the project down into smaller, more manageable tasks. Celebrate each small accomplishment. You are capable. You can do this." This time, the process felt different. It was as if I was witnessing the negative thoughts from a distance, observing them without judgment. The self-compassion wasn't about denying the negative emotions, but about creating space for them, acknowledging their presence without allowing them to define me. I started to keep a journal, documenting my self-talk, both positive and negative. This became a powerful tool for self-reflection, allowing me to track my progress, identify triggers for self-criticism, and refine my strategies for self-compassion. The journal entries became a chronicle of my transformation, a testament to the power of neuroplasticity in action. The shift extended beyond the internal dialogue. I noticed an improvement in my relationships with others. My ability to empathize with others deepened, leading to more meaningful connections. The self-compassion I cultivated towards myself spilled over into my interactions with friends, family, and colleagues. I became more patient, more forgiving, and more understanding of their flaws and imperfections. The transformation was gradual, a slow but steady rewiring of my brain. The negative neural pathways, etched by years of self-criticism, were slowly being replaced by new pathways of self-acceptance and self-compassion. The process wasn't always easy, but with each act of self-compassion, I felt a deepening sense of self-worth, a quiet confidence that strengthened with each passing day. I began to recognize the self-criticism for what it was, a flawed and unhelpful narrative that did not reflect my true worth. It was a defense mechanism, a product of past experiences and ingrained beliefs. But it was just a narrative, and I had the power to rewrite it, to choose a more compassionate and empowering story. I embraced the setbacks, viewing them as opportunities to practice, to refine my techniques, and to cultivate a stronger sense of self-compassion. It was a continuous journey, a constant dialogue between the old critical voice and the emerging voice of self-compassion. But with each passing day, the voice of self-compassion grew stronger, its gentle resonance slowly drowning out the harsh whispers of self-criticism. The change was not merely psychological, it was physiological. The reduction in stress and anxiety translated into improved sleep, increased energy levels, and a more positive outlook on life. The neuroplastic changes were tangible, a testament to the power of the mind to heal and transform. My resilience grew, not from some inherent strength, but from the conscious cultivation of self-compassion. I could approach life's challenges with greater equanimity, knowing that I had the resources within me to navigate any storm, armed with the unwavering support of my self-compassionate inner voice. And then, something unexpected began to emerge, something subtle but unmistakable. A quiet, unfamiliar sense of confidence, one I hadn't known in years, started surfacing in ways I couldn't explain. Was it real? Could it last? Or was it just another illusion waiting to fade? The quiet confidence I'd begun to cultivate wasn't a sudden blossoming. It was a slow, deliberate growth, like a sturdy oak pushing its roots deeper into the earth. It started with small victories. I noticed myself taking credit for accomplishments instead of dismissing them as mere luck or circumstance. Completing a challenging project at work, which once would have sparked a wave of self-doubt, now brought a sense of genuine pride. Instead of minimizing my contribution, I allowed myself to savor the feeling of accomplishment, whispering to myself, "You did it. You overcame the obstacles. You're capable of incredible things." This shift in perspective extended beyond the professional realm. I started paying attention to my hobbies again, rediscovering the joy of activities I'd neglected during my period of burnout. Painting, once a source of self-criticism, "This is awful, I'm not talented," became a source of quiet pleasure, a space where I could express myself without judgment. I began to appreciate the process, the act of creation itself, rather than fixating on the outcome. My inner voice shifted from harsh critique to gentle encouragement, a supportive presence guiding me through the creative process. The improved self-esteem wasn't just a feeling, it was a tangible change in my behavior. I found myself taking on new challenges, stepping outside my comfort zone, confident that even if I didn't succeed, the experience would be a valuable lesson, a chance for growth. This newfound courage extended to my social life. I was more assertive in expressing my needs and opinions, no longer shrinking back from conversations or interactions that once intimidated me. The fear of judgment faded as my self-compassion deepened. One evening, I found myself at a family gathering, an event that usually triggered a cascade of self-doubt. In the past, I'd spent these events hyper-aware of my perceived inadequacies, constantly comparing myself to others. But this time, it was different. I found myself enjoying the conversations, genuinely connecting with my family members, listening to their stories with empathy and genuine interest. I even shared some of my own experiences, something I'd previously avoided, fearing judgment or criticism. My newfound self-assurance wasn't about arrogance or self-importance. It was about self-respect. It was about recognizing my worth, understanding my value, and appreciating my unique strengths. I still had moments of self-doubt, of course. The old patterns didn't simply vanish overnight. But when they surfaced, I was better equipped to handle them. I could now recognize the negative self-talk as a fleeting thought, a whisper rather than a roar, and gently redirect my inner dialogue towards self-compassion. The long-term effects of this self-compassion were remarkable. My physical health improved as the chronic stress and anxiety I'd carried for so long began to dissipate. I slept better, had more energy, and even noticed a decrease in physical symptoms associated with stress. The improved mental well-being had a cascading effect on all aspects of my life. This self-compassion wasn't confined to my internal dialogue. It influenced my relationships with others. I found myself becoming more empathetic and understanding of those around me, more patient with their flaws and imperfections. My interactions became richer, deeper, and more meaningful. I was more able to offer support to others, recognizing that everyone struggles, and that kindness and compassion are vital to navigating life's challenges. One particularly poignant interaction stands out. A close friend was going through a difficult time, struggling with a personal crisis. In the past, I might have felt overwhelmed by their struggles, unsure of how to offer support without feeling responsible for their well-being. But this time, I approached the situation differently. I listened attentively, offering empathy and understanding without judgment or criticism. I reminded myself of my own journey, of the power of self-compassion to overcome challenges. My response to my friend's situation was a testament to the transformative power of self-compassion. I had cultivated an internal reservoir of empathy, enabling me to offer genuine support without losing sight of my own well-being. It was a testament to the interconnectedness of self-compassion and compassion for others. The boundary between my inner world and my interactions with the external world had blurred, creating a harmonious blend of self-care and empathy. The journal I'd started keeping became an invaluable tool in charting this transformation. I could trace the progression of my self-talk, witnessing the gradual shift from criticism to self-acceptance. The entries chronicled not just my internal struggles, but also the moments of triumph, the instances where I'd successfully redirected negative self-talk towards self-compassion. The journal became a tangible representation of my growth, a record of my journey towards self-acceptance. The process was ongoing, a constant practice of self-awareness and mindful self-talk. It was about consistently choosing self-compassion over self-criticism, even in moments of stress or failure. It was about recognizing that setbacks are inevitable and that the key is not to avoid them, but to learn from them, to use them as opportunities for growth and self-understanding. It required consistent effort, a daily commitment to cultivating self-compassion. The changes weren't just internal, they extended to my external world. My relationships with others deepened, my work improved, and I found myself engaging with life in a more meaningful and fulfilling way. The self-esteem cultivated wasn't an ego boost, it was a quiet confidence, a deep-seated sense of self-worth that permeated every aspect of my life. It's been a year since my initial panic attack, a year of conscious effort to rewire my brain, to reprogram my inner narrative. The journey continues, a constant negotiation between old habits and new behaviors. Sometimes the old voice of self-criticism whispers, but it's quieter now, its power diminished by the strength of the self-compassion that has taken root within me. It's a continuous process, a lifelong commitment to self-acceptance and self-compassion. But the transformation, the shift from a life dominated by self-criticism to one guided by self-compassion, has been profoundly life-altering. It's a testament to the plasticity of the brain and the incredible power of self-compassion to heal and transform. Still, as the sun dipped below the skyline one evening, casting long shadows across my journal pages, a thought emerged. Quiet, persistent. If this much change was possible through compassion alone, what would happen if I rewired the very identity beneath the voice? Chapter 3. Identity-based statements. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the otherwise silent apartment. It was late, the city lights a hazy smudge outside my window. The day had been productive. Not in the sense of ticking off items on a to-do list, but in a deeper, more profound way. I'd spent the afternoon wrestling with something far more challenging than any spreadsheet or client meeting. Myself. My journey into self-directed neuroplasticity was proving to be far more intricate than I had initially imagined. The first two steps, the second-person self-talk and the mindful observation of negative thoughts, had been surprisingly effective. They provided a foundation, a scaffolding upon which I was now building something truly new, a revised narrative of my identity. Dr. Ramirez had explained it beautifully. Our brains are not static, unchanging structures. They're incredibly plastic, constantly adapting and rewiring themselves based on our experiences and thoughts. Negative self-talk, the constant stream of self-criticism, had literally carved neural pathways in my brain, reinforcing feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. But by consciously choosing different thoughts, by replacing negative self-talk with positive affirmations, I was creating new pathways, forging new neural connections that strengthened my sense of self-worth. This third step, crafting identity-based statements, felt like the most significant leap yet. It wasn't simply about positive thinking, it was about actively shaping my self-image, consciously constructing the person I wanted to become. Dr. Ramirez had stressed the importance of making these statements specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, the SMART goals framework adapted for inner work. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the slightly messy collection of papers and pens. My journal lay open, its pages filled with the raw, unfiltered emotions of the past weeks. Now it was time to fill those pages with something new, something different, something powerful. The first statement came easily. I am capable of achieving my goals. It felt almost too simple, too cliché. Yet as I wrote it, I felt a flicker of something. Not just belief, but a genuine sense of possibility. This wasn't wishful thinking. It was a declaration of intent, a commitment to action. The act of writing it, the physical process of forming the letters on the page, seemed to imprint the statement onto my brain, reinforcing its message. The second statement was more challenging. I am worthy of love and respect. This one touched a deeper nerve, a long-held belief that I was somehow deficient, undeserving of happiness. As I wrote the words, a wave of emotion washed over me, a mix of sadness, doubt, and a burgeoning sense of hope. It was a battle, a quiet internal struggle between the old, ingrained negativity and the emerging sense of self-worth. But this time, the hope felt stronger, more resilient. I continued crafting statements that targeted specific areas of my life. I am confident in my abilities. I am resilient in the face of adversity. I am kind and compassionate to myself and others. Each statement felt like a small act of rebellion, a defiance of the negative self-talk that had dominated my thoughts for so long. As I wrote, I imagined the neural pathways in my brain being reshaped, the connections strengthening with each repetition. This wasn't just about positive thinking, it was about neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells, the physical rewiring of my brain to support a new, more positive self-image. Dr. Ramirez had emphasized the importance of repetition. She'd suggested repeating these statements aloud, multiple times a day, to further solidify the new neural pathways. So, I began, whispering them to myself at first, then gradually increasing my volume, until I was speaking them aloud with conviction. I started incorporating them into my daily routine. I'd repeat them as I brushed my teeth, as I walked to work, as I lay in bed at night. I'd write them on sticky notes and place them around my apartment, a constant reminder of my evolving self-image. It wasn't easy. There were days when the old negative self-talk crept back in, whispering doubts and criticisms. But now I had a weapon to fight back: my identity-based statements. When the negative thoughts arose, I would consciously repeat my affirmations, counteracting the negativity with positive self-reinforcement. The process was gradual, but the results were undeniable. I felt a growing sense of self-acceptance, a deeper understanding of my own worth. My confidence grew, not as arrogance, but as a quiet assurance in my abilities. I was no longer defined by my past failures. I was empowered by my present efforts and my future aspirations. The scientific basis for this transformation was incredibly compelling. Each time I repeated my identity-based statements, I was reinforcing the neural connections associated with those positive beliefs. My brain was literally rewiring itself, creating new pathways that supported my new self-image. It was a testament to the remarkable plasticity of the human brain, its capacity for growth and change. The change wasn't just internal, it was also external. My interactions with others became smoother, more confident. I found myself speaking up in meetings, expressing my opinions without hesitation. My relationships with friends and family deepened, as I communicated my needs and boundaries with greater clarity and assertiveness. The fear of judgment faded as my self-acceptance grew. I started taking risks, pursuing opportunities that once seemed impossible. I applied for a promotion at work, a prospect that would have terrified me just a few months earlier. I signed up for a painting class, a passion I'd abandoned due to self-doubt. I even started dating again, something I'd avoided for years. The shift was profound. It wasn't a sudden transformation, it was a gradual, almost imperceptible change, a slow but steady shift in my perception of myself. My identity was evolving, being shaped not by my past mistakes or limitations, but by my present intention and future aspirations. One evening, I sat down to write in my journal. I reread the initial statements I'd crafted, feeling a surge of pride. They weren't just words on a page, they were a testament to my journey, a tangible representation of my transformation. I added new statements, reflecting my evolving self-image, my growing sense of confidence and self-acceptance. The process wasn't over, it was ongoing, a continuous practice of self-awareness and self-affirmation. There would undoubtedly be setbacks, moments of doubt and self-criticism, but I knew now that I had the tools to navigate these challenges, to redirect negative thoughts towards positive affirmations, to reshape my self-image through the power of my own mind. My journey into self-directed neuroplasticity was proving to be a profound and transformative experience. It was a testament to the power of self-compassion, the remarkable plasticity of the brain, and the limitless potential for personal growth and transformation. It was a journey of self-discovery, a journey of self-creation, and it was just the beginning. Still, even with all this progress, a question lingered. Quiet, insistent. Would these affirmations hold when life tested me again? The morning sun, a pale imitation of its midday brilliance, filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across my bedroom floor. I lay in bed, the remnants of sleep clinging to me like a damp sheet. This wasn't the exhausted, listless me of just a few weeks ago. Instead, I felt a quiet energy, a sense of purpose that hummed beneath the surface. It was subtle, a quiet confidence that grew stronger with each passing day. It was the result of my daily ritual, a commitment to myself, a meticulous rewiring of my brain. My identity-based statements were no longer just words on a page. They were incantations, whispered affirmations that resonated deep within me. I had begun incorporating them into every aspect of my life, weaving them into the fabric of my daily routine. As I brushed my teeth, I murmured, "I am capable, I am strong, I am worthy." The repetition, initially awkward and forced, now felt natural, almost instinctive. It was as if my subconscious had embraced the message, transforming these simple pronouncements into a bedrock of self-belief. The commute, once a source of anxiety, had become a time for self-reflection and reinforcement. On the subway, amidst the jostling crowd, I would silently repeat my affirmations, the rhythm of the train mirroring the steady beat of my self-affirmations. The statement, "I am resilient in the face of adversity," took on a new meaning as I navigated the daily challenges, the delays, the overcrowded cars, the unexpected setbacks, with a calm assurance that surprised even myself. At work, the once daunting tasks no longer felt overwhelming. The affirmations acted as a shield against self-doubt, helping me approach my responsibilities with renewed confidence. Before entering a challenging meeting, I'd take a deep breath and silently repeat, "I am confident in my abilities," the words grounding me, bolstering my resolve. I found myself volunteering for projects, speaking up in meetings, taking calculated risks, behaviors that were unthinkable just weeks before. My colleagues noticed the change, commenting on my newfound assertiveness, my increased confidence. Their positive feedback further strengthened my belief in my own potential. Lunch breaks became opportunities for mindful repetition. Sitting in the park, surrounded by the calming sounds of nature, I would recite my affirmations, feeling a sense of connection between my inner world and the world around me. The rhythm of my words synchronized with the rhythm of my breath, creating a sense of inner peace and stability. Each repetition felt like a small act of self-care, a conscious effort to nurture my growing self-esteem. Evenings were no longer filled with the dread of another day of self-criticism. Instead, they were dedicated to self-reflection and reinforcement. I would write in my journal, expanding on my statements, adding new ones as my understanding of myself deepened. The act of writing became a meditation, a process of self-discovery and self-acceptance. The physical act of writing seemed to imprint the words onto my brain, further cementing the positive affirmations into my subconscious. The power of repetition, Dr. Ramirez had explained, was not merely psychological, it was neurobiological. Each repetition strengthened the neural pathways associated with these positive affirmations, creating a feedback loop that reinforced my positive self-image. The brain, far from being a static entity, was constantly adapting, rewiring itself in response to our thoughts and actions. By consciously repeating my affirmations, I was actively shaping my brain, creating new neural pathways that supported my new sense of self-worth. One evening during a particularly stressful week, I found myself feeling overwhelmed. The old negative self-talk began to creep back in, whispering doubts and criticisms. But this time, I didn't let it take hold. I immediately started repeating my affirmations, countering the negativity with positive self-reinforcement. I visualized the neural pathways in my brain, the positive connections strengthening, the negative ones weakening. This conscious act of self-regulation was crucial. It was not about suppressing the negative thoughts, but about counteracting them with a more powerful positive narrative. It was in these moments of challenge that the true power of my affirmations emerged. They were not just about feeling good. They were about building resilience, about creating a strong foundation for self-belief. They were a practical tool, a method for navigating the inevitable ups and downs of life with greater equanimity and self-assurance. The change wasn't simply a matter of improved mood, it was a transformation in my very being. I was learning to approach life's challenges not with fear and self-doubt, but with courage and determination. My relationships improved. I communicated my needs more effectively, setting healthy boundaries and expressing my feelings with greater clarity. My interactions with others became more fulfilling, based on mutual respect and understanding. The impact extended beyond my personal life. At work, I took on more responsibility, exceeding expectations and earning recognition for my contributions. The self-doubt that once paralyzed me was replaced with a quiet confidence, a belief in my abilities that radiated outward, influencing my interactions and achievements. This wasn't a magic cure, a quick fix to my problems. It was a commitment, a daily practice that required consistency, patience, and self-compassion. There were days when the negative self-talk would resurface, when doubts would creep in, testing the strength of my newly formed positive self-image. But I learned to view these setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities for growth, as chances to reinforce my affirmations and strengthen my resilience. The journey continued, evolving with each passing day, each new affirmation I added to my repertoire. It was a process of constant growth, of self-discovery and self-creation. My identity was no longer defined by my past struggles, but shaped by my present actions and future aspirations. As I write these words, I am keenly aware that this journey is ongoing, a lifelong commitment to self-awareness and self-acceptance. The hum of the refrigerator, once a symbol of my solitude and self-doubt, now feels like a comforting background noise, a testament to the quiet transformation that has taken place within me. I am writing my own story, one carefully crafted affirmation at a time. And it's a good one. A story of resilience, of self-discovery, of the remarkable power of the human mind to shape its own destiny. But there was still one thing I hadn't dared to confront. What if my deepest limiting beliefs weren't just habits, but hidden identities I was still unconsciously clinging to? The quiet hum of the refrigerator, once a soundtrack to my lonely evenings, now seemed a comforting presence. The transformation wasn't sudden, it wasn't a dramatic Hollywood-style epiphany. It was a slow, steady shift, a gradual rewiring of my brain, a conscious reshaping of my identity. It began with recognizing the insidious whispers of my limiting beliefs, those insidious, self-defeating narratives that had held me captive for so long. I started with a simple exercise, journaling. Every evening, I'd sit down with my notebook and pen, and I'd write down every negative thought that surfaced during the day. Not just the big, obvious ones, but the tiny, seemingly insignificant ones too. The fleeting moments of self-doubt, the quick judgments I made about myself, the criticisms I leveled at my own performance. It was surprisingly difficult at first. It felt like dredging up mud from the bottom of a murky pond, bringing into the light all the hidden anxieties and insecurities that I had carefully buried. Initially, the list was long, daunting, almost overwhelming. I was surprised by the sheer volume of negative self-talk that permeated my daily thoughts. It was a relentless barrage of criticism, a constant stream of negativity directed inward. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. I'm a failure. These weren't dramatic pronouncements. They were subtle, insidious undercurrents that poisoned my self-perception. They were the invisible shackles that bound me, limiting my potential and hindering my progress. But the act of writing them down, of bringing them into the conscious realm, was the first step towards challenging them. It was like shining a flashlight into a dark corner, exposing the shadows that had lurked there for so long. Once identified, these beliefs could no longer hold me captive in their silent grip. The sheer volume of them was a stark revelation, a jarring awareness of how much negative self-talk had shaped my life. The next step was even more challenging. Reframing those beliefs. This wasn't about simply dismissing them or ignoring them. It was about understanding their origins, questioning their validity, and replacing them with more empowering, realistic ones. Dr. Ramirez had emphasized the importance of cognitive restructuring, the process of identifying and challenging maladaptive thought patterns and replacing them with more adaptive ones. She had explained that this process wasn't merely a mental exercise, it was a fundamental rewiring of the brain. For each negative belief, I wrote a corresponding positive affirmation. For I'm not good enough, I wrote, I am capable and worthy of success. For I'll never succeed, I wrote, I am resilient and persistent, and I will achieve my goals. For I'm a failure, I wrote, I am a work in progress, and I am constantly learning and growing. These weren't grandiose statements, they were small, incremental steps towards building a more positive self-image. The process wasn't always easy. There were times when the negative thoughts seemed overwhelming, when the old patterns of self-criticism threatened to engulf me. But I learned to view these setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities for growth, chances to reinforce my new, empowering beliefs. I reminded myself that my brain was constantly adapting, rewiring itself in response to my conscious efforts. Each time I consciously challenged a negative thought and replaced it with a positive affirmation, I was strengthening the neural pathways associated with that positive thought. It was a process of ongoing self-discovery, a constant negotiation between my old, ingrained patterns of thinking and my new, consciously cultivated beliefs. It was like a tug-of-war between two opposing forces, with the positive affirmations gradually gaining the upper hand. The more I repeated my affirmations, the more they became embedded in my subconscious, the more they became a part of my identity. One evening, I had a breakthrough. I was sitting in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, when I realized that my limiting beliefs weren't facts. They were simply thoughts, interpretations of events, not objective truths. This was a pivotal realization. It meant that I had the power to choose a different narrative. I wasn't trapped by my past. I wasn't defined by my failures. I was the author of my own story, and I could choose to rewrite it. This realization sparked a cascade of insights. I began to see my past mistakes not as evidence of my inherent flaws, but as valuable learning experiences, stepping stones on my path towards growth. I started to appreciate the resilience I had shown in overcoming challenges, the strength I had demonstrated in persevering through adversity. I began to see myself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a powerful agent of change. The change wasn't simply about feeling better, it was about fundamentally altering my relationship with myself. It was about developing a deeper sense of self-compassion, a greater acceptance of my imperfections. It was about fostering a sense of self-efficacy, a belief in my ability to overcome challenges and achieve my goals. My relationships began to improve. I communicated my needs more effectively, setting healthy boundaries without feeling guilty. My interactions with others became more authentic, more fulfilling. My self-confidence grew, and I found myself attracting positive relationships built on mutual respect and understanding. The impact extended beyond my personal life. At work, I felt more empowered to take risks, to speak up in meetings, to advocate for myself. My work improved, and I earned recognition for my contributions. My career began to flourish, fueled by my newfound self-belief and resilience. The journey hasn't been without its bumps in the road. There were times when the old negative self-talk would resurface, testing my resolve. But I learned to approach these setbacks with kindness and understanding, recognizing them as temporary setbacks, not evidence of failure. I would gently redirect my thoughts, refocusing on my positive affirmations, reminding myself of the progress I had made. This process became a form of meditation, a practice in self-regulation. The power of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to our thoughts and actions, became a tangible reality. I could feel my brain changing, adapting, growing stronger with each conscious act of self-affirmation. This was not merely a matter of positive thinking, it was a neurobiological transformation. The consistent repetition of positive affirmations had literally reshaped my brain, creating new neural pathways that supported my new sense of self-worth and self-efficacy. The quiet hum of the refrigerator now held a different resonance. It was no longer a symbol of loneliness and self-doubt. It was a gentle reminder of the transformation that had taken place, a quiet testament to the power of self-compassion, the strength of resilience, and the incredible capacity of the human brain to reshape itself, to heal and to grow. My story, once defined by limitations, is now being rewritten, one empowering affirmation at a time, and this is just the beginning. But still, something lingered. Could this transformation hold up when life inevitably threw me a curveball, a real test? The realization that my limiting beliefs weren't facts but merely interpretations was a watershed moment. It didn't magically erase years of ingrained negativity, but it gave me the power to choose a different narrative. I began to approach my imperfections not as flaws demanding eradication, but as integral parts of my unique tapestry. This shift was crucial. It moved me beyond simply replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It was about embracing the entire spectrum of my experience, the good, the bad, and the messy bits in between. This newfound self-acceptance wasn't passive resignation. It wasn't about lowering my standards or accepting mediocrity. Instead, it was about fostering a compassionate understanding of my humanity. I acknowledged that setbacks were inevitable. They weren't personal failings, but simply part of the process of growth. Each stumble became an opportunity for learning, a chance to analyze what went wrong, adjust my approach, and try again. This perspective shift completely altered my relationship with failure. It was no longer something to be feared or avoided, but a valuable teacher, a guide on my path forward. My workplace, once a source of constant anxiety, started to feel different. I still faced challenges, deadlines loomed, projects stalled, and conflicts arose. But my response changed. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, I approached these situations with a renewed sense of resilience. If a presentation didn't go exactly as planned, I wouldn't berate myself. I'd analyze what could be improved next time and focus on the aspects that went well. I started offering constructive feedback to colleagues rather than internalizing criticism and allowing it to erode my self-worth. This change wasn't lost on my colleagues. My newfound calm and proactive approach to problem-solving made me a more effective team member. I became known not only for my skills, but also for my positive attitude and willingness to learn from mistakes. This positive feedback loop further reinforced my sense of self-acceptance and boosted my confidence. My home life also underwent a transformation. The pressure to maintain a perfect image, to always be productive and efficient, began to ease. I allowed myself to rest when I needed to indulge in hobbies without guilt, and to simply be present in the moment. This sense of ease extended to my personal relationships. I was more patient with loved ones, more forgiving of imperfections, both in myself and others. The constant need for external validation lessened. My self-worth no longer depended on external approval. This inner stability led to more honest and fulfilling connections with people around me. One evening, I was catching up with an old friend over coffee. We were reminiscing about past experiences, some successes, many failures. He confessed to struggling with similar self-criticism issues. He marveled at my transformation. I shared my journey, focusing on the principles of neuroplasticity and the power of self-compassion. I explained how embracing imperfection didn't mean accepting defeat. It meant accepting the human experience in all its complexity. The conversation affirmed my own progress. Helping someone else navigate similar challenges reinforced my understanding and solidified my practice. Sharing my experience also provided a sense of purpose, strengthening my resolve to continue on my path of self-discovery and growth. It reminded me that the process wasn't just about personal improvement, it was about contributing positively to the lives of others. It was about sharing the tools and techniques that had been so transformative for me. The journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of self-doubt, times when the old negative narratives tried to reassert their dominance. But I had developed the tools to counter them. I recognized the negative thoughts for what they were, fleeting mental patterns, not immutable truths. I approached them with a sense of compassionate understanding, acknowledging their presence without letting them dictate my mood or actions. I started using mindfulness techniques to observe these thoughts without judgment. This allowed me to detach from them, to see them as passing clouds rather than raging storms. I practiced deep breathing exercises to calm my nervous system and reduce the intensity of emotional responses. These techniques, combined with my consistent positive affirmations, helped build a stronger foundation of self-acceptance and resilience. I also incorporated physical activity into my routine. Regular exercise helped reduce stress, improve sleep, and boost my overall mood. It became a form of self-care, a way of nurturing my physical and mental well-being. The physical changes were tangible: increased energy levels, improved sleep patterns, and a greater sense of strength and vitality. This, in turn, fostered a more positive self-image and fueled my sense of self-efficacy. My social life blossomed as well. I was more comfortable being myself, flaws and all. I engaged in spontaneous activities, embraced new interests, and let go of the need to perform for approval. This freedom attracted like-minded people and led to deeper, more meaningful relationships. Looking back, I can clearly see the power of neuroplasticity in action. My brain had literally reshaped itself in response to my conscious efforts. The neural pathways associated with negative self-talk had weakened, replaced by stronger ones rooted in self-compassion, resilience, and self-acceptance. This transformation wasn't just a mental shift, it was a fundamental change in my being. It extended to every corner of my life, from my career and relationships to my health and overall sense of peace. The quiet hum of the refrigerator is now accompanied by a deep stillness, a contentment I once believed was unreachable. It hums in rhythm with the life I've rebuilt from within, a testament to the brain's capacity to heal and the soul's capacity to grow. But just when I thought the transformation was complete, something unexpected happened. I began to feel a new pull, an invitation not just to accept who I was, but to become something even more. The consistent repetition of my identity-based statements, those carefully crafted phrases designed to counter the ingrained negativity, began to yield tangible results. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a gradual, almost imperceptible change in my internal landscape. It was like slowly turning down the volume on a persistent, nagging inner critic, allowing a quieter, more compassionate voice to emerge. This wasn't about denying the challenges I faced. It was about reframing them, seeing them not as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for growth and learning. The impact on my interactions with others was profound. Before, I had approached conversations with a sense of underlying anxiety, anticipating criticism or rejection. I'd often second-guess myself, constantly seeking external validation. Now I found myself engaging more authentically. The fear of judgment lessened, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own worth. I listened more attentively, truly hearing what others were saying, rather than formulating my responses while they were still speaking. My communication style shifted from defensive to collaborative. I was more willing to express my opinions, even when they differed from those of others, without fearing conflict. This newfound ease in communication fostered stronger, deeper connections with the people around me. Arguments became less frequent, and when they did arise, they were handled with a greater degree of empathy and understanding. I was less likely to take things personally, viewing disagreements as opportunities for clarifying perspectives rather than personal attacks. My outlook on life underwent a parallel transformation. What had once felt like a relentless uphill battle now felt more like a journey, with its inevitable ups and downs. Setbacks, once experienced as crushing defeats, were now viewed as valuable learning experiences. I analyzed them, identified the lessons they held, and adjusted my approach accordingly. This shift in perspective not only reduced stress, but also fostered resilience. I was more adaptable, more willing to embrace change, and more confident in my ability to overcome challenges. My sense of purpose deepened. I began to actively seek out ways to contribute to something larger than myself, finding fulfillment in volunteering, mentoring, and supporting causes I cared about. This wasn't merely a fleeting mood change. It represented a fundamental alteration in my cognitive patterns. The neuroplasticity I'd learned about was clearly at work. My brain was literally rewiring itself, forming new neural pathways that reinforced positive self-belief. The old negative narratives, once so dominant, were gradually losing their grip. The process wasn't always easy. There were days when the old habits resurfaced, when self-doubt crept in, and when I found myself reverting to old negative thought patterns. But each time I had the tools to counter them. I practiced self-compassion, reminding myself that setbacks were normal, that imperfection was part of the human experience. I returned to my identity-based statements, reaffirming my self-worth, my capabilities, and my inherent value. I utilized the mindfulness techniques I'd developed, allowing negative thoughts to pass through my awareness without judgment, like fleeting clouds across a sky. The long-term effects of these identity-based statements proved remarkable. My sleep improved, my anxiety reduced significantly, and my overall sense of well-being soared. The constant hum of underlying stress, a familiar companion for so long, faded, replaced by a quiet sense of contentment. I experienced a profound increase in self-efficacy, a belief in my ability to achieve my goals and overcome challenges. This newfound confidence extended to all areas of my life, my work, my relationships, and my personal pursuits. I felt more empowered to take risks, to pursue my dreams, and to live a life aligned with my values. One noticeable change was my improved capacity for self-regulation. I found myself handling stressful situations with greater composure and emotional intelligence. The impulsive reactions that once characterized my responses to challenges became less frequent, replaced by a thoughtful, measured approach. This self-awareness allowed me to respond constructively rather than react defensively, improving my relationships and fostering stronger bonds with others. The ripple effects of this were significant. My improved emotional regulation positively impacted my physical health. I experienced a reduction in stress-related physical symptoms, such as headaches and muscle tension. My overall energy levels increased, and I felt a greater sense of vitality and zest for life. Even my physical appearance seemed to benefit from this inner transformation, radiating a sense of calmness and well-being. I also experienced an increased sense of creativity and productivity. The freedom from the constant self-criticism allowed me to approach tasks with greater openness and enthusiasm. I was more willing to experiment, take creative risks, and step outside my comfort zone. My productivity increased, not because I was working harder, but because I was working more efficiently and with a greater sense of purpose. The self-acceptance cultivated through this process allowed me to embrace imperfections and learn from mistakes without getting bogged down in self-recrimination. This freed up mental space, enabling me to focus on solutions rather than dwelling on problems. The journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when I faltered, when doubt crept in, when the old negative patterns threatened to resurface. But each time I returned to my foundation of self-acceptance, reinforcing my positive identity statements and practicing my mindfulness techniques. I had learned that self-compassion was not weakness, but a powerful tool for resilience. Acknowledging my imperfections and flaws allowed me to work through them constructively rather than letting them define me. My relationship with myself transformed entirely. The constant inner criticism that had plagued me for so long faded, replaced by a sense of self-compassion and acceptance. I learned to appreciate my strengths and to acknowledge my weaknesses without judgment. I recognized that my worth was inherent and unconditional, not dependent on my achievements or external validation. The process of cultivating self-acceptance through consistent use of identity-based statements wasn't a quick fix. It was a journey of continuous growth and refinement. It required dedication, patience, and consistent practice. But the rewards were immeasurable, profoundly reshaping my life in ways I could never have imagined. The lasting impact went far beyond a simple improvement in mood or outlook. It was a transformation of my very being, a fundamental shift in my relationship with myself and the world around me. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, once a symbol of my anxiety-ridden routine, now resonates with a quiet contentment, a testament to the power of the brain's capacity for change and the transformative potential of self-acceptance. The journey is ongoing, a continuous process of self-discovery and growth, but the foundation of self-acceptance, built through neuroplasticity, provides a solid, unwavering base from which to continue my journey. And then one morning, I found myself staring at a thought I'd written in my journal the night before. It seemed harmless, but something about it wouldn't let me go. Was it a thought, or had I once mistaken it for a fact? Chapter 4. Labeling Thoughts. The next step in my transformation involved learning to differentiate between my thoughts and objective facts. This wasn't as simple as it sounds. For years, my negative thoughts had held the weight of undeniable truths. Anxiety whispers became unshakable convictions. Self-doubt solidified into self-fulfilling prophecies. My inner critic, a relentless commentator on my every move, had become so ingrained that I barely registered its presence, accepting its pronouncements as gospel. The process of separating thought from fact began with conscious awareness. I started paying attention to the stream of my inner dialogue, observing it without judgment, like a scientist studying a phenomenon. This required a significant shift in perspective. Instead of reacting automatically to negative thoughts, I began to treat them as data points, as fleeting mental events rather than absolute truths. I learned to recognize the difference between a factual statement, "I missed the deadline on my project," and a thought, "I'm a complete failure." The first is verifiable, the second is an interpretation, a subjective assessment colored by my pre-existing beliefs and anxieties. This distinction, while seemingly subtle, proved profoundly powerful. Identifying a thought as a thought, rather than a fact, diffused its emotional charge. Imagine a speeding car heading directly toward you. The fact is, a car is approaching at high speed. The thought might be, "I'm going to die." The fact is verifiable. The thought is an interpretation, a potential outcome, not a certainty. Similarly, a failed project isn't necessarily evidence of personal failure. It's a single event within the larger context of my life. It's a fact, a piece of information, not a judgment on my overall worth. The practice involved cultivating a sense of mental spaciousness, creating room between myself and the relentless flow of my thoughts. Mindfulness meditation played a crucial role in this process. Through meditation, I learned to observe my thoughts without getting carried away by them. Instead of identifying with my thoughts, I observed them as separate entities, arising and passing away in the ever-changing stream of consciousness. This mental detachment was crucial for reframing negative thoughts. It allowed me to step back from the emotional intensity and examine their validity more objectively. This wasn't about suppressing negative emotions. Instead, it was about gaining perspective, understanding that my thoughts, while powerful, didn't hold the ultimate authority over my reality. They were simply thoughts, hypotheses, mental models, not unchangeable, immutable laws. One of the first situations where I actively applied this technique was during a tense meeting at work. Previously, similar meetings would trigger a cascade of anxious thoughts. They're going to criticize my presentation. I'm not prepared enough. I'm going to look foolish. These thoughts would instantly create a physiological response: a racing heart, clammy hands, shortness of breath. This time, however, when the negative thoughts emerged, I consciously labeled them as thoughts, not facts. I acknowledged their presence without engaging with them emotionally. I'm noticing the thought that I'm going to look foolish, I mentally noted. But that's just a thought, not a fact. It's not a certainty. This simple act of labeling significantly altered my experience. The physiological response was noticeably less intense. The anxiety didn't vanish completely, but its power was diminished. I was able to focus more effectively on the meeting itself, delivering my presentation with greater confidence and clarity. While I might have felt a slight tremor in my hands, the overwhelming wave of panic that had previously crippled me was absent. Another powerful application of this technique was in managing social situations. In the past, fear of rejection frequently paralyzed me, preventing me from initiating conversations or forming connections with others. The thought, "they won't like me," would loom large, often deterring me from social interactions. But now, equipped with this new tool, I could label that thought as simply that: a thought, not a fact. It was a possibility, not a certainty. Recognizing this changed my approach significantly. I could actively choose to engage, to put myself out there, even in the face of these anxious thoughts. The impact on my personal relationships was remarkable. Disagreements, once fraught with tension and defensiveness, became opportunities for constructive dialogue. Rather than viewing a difference of opinion as a personal attack, I could label the resulting negative thoughts: "They're trying to undermine me. I'm wrong," as just that, thoughts. This allowed me to approach the conflict with greater calm and clarity, fostering more empathy and understanding. Over time, the frequency and intensity of my negative thoughts diminished. This wasn't because I suppressed them. Rather, it was because I had changed my relationship with them. They were no longer the unshakable authorities dictating my emotions and actions. They were simply thoughts, transient mental events that I could observe, label, and let go of. The process of consistently labeling thoughts as thoughts, not facts, had a profound impact on my overall sense of well-being. My self-esteem increased significantly. I felt more resilient in the face of setbacks, less prone to self-criticism, and more accepting of my imperfections. The transformation was gradual but tangible, a testament to the power of neuroplasticity and the ability of the human brain to rewire itself, creating new neural pathways that promote emotional regulation and self-acceptance. The old ingrained pathways, once so dominant, were being overwritten by new, more positive patterns. This wasn't simply about intellectual understanding, it was about embodiment. It was about experiencing the tangible shift in physiological response when a potentially anxiety-provoking thought is identified not as a truth, but as a thought, a mental construct. This fundamental shift creates an internal space for more nuanced perspectives to emerge, offering new possibilities and choices in how to respond. The process isn't always easy. There will be moments of relapse, moments when the old patterns resurface with their inherent emotional intensity. But through consistent practice and self-compassion, these moments become opportunities for further refinement, strengthening the new neural pathways and deepening the integration of this powerful technique. The key is to remember that this is a journey, a continuous process of self-discovery and growth, a journey where the destination is as valuable as the path taken to reach it. And every step, every conscious act of labeling moves me closer to living a life authentically aligned with my values and self-belief. But something still eluded me. I had learned to name my thoughts. But could I learn to let them go? The process of separating thought from fact began with conscious awareness. I started paying attention to the stream of my inner dialogue, observing it without judgment, like a scientist studying a phenomenon. This required a significant shift in perspective. Instead of reacting automatically to negative thoughts, I began to treat them as data points, as fleeting mental events rather than absolute truths. I learned to recognize the difference between a factual statement, "I missed the deadline on my project," and a thought, "I'm a complete failure." The first is verifiable, the second is an interpretation, a subjective assessment colored by my pre-existing beliefs and anxieties. This distinction, while seemingly subtle, proved profoundly powerful. Identifying a thought as a thought rather than a fact diffused its emotional charge. Imagine a speeding car heading directly toward you. The fact is, a car is approaching at high speed. The thought might be, "I'm going to die." The fact is verifiable, the thought is an interpretation, a potential outcome, not a certainty. Similarly, a failed project isn't necessarily evidence of personal failure. It's a single event within the larger context of my life. It's a fact, a piece of information, not a judgment on my overall worth. The practice involved cultivating a sense of mental spaciousness, creating room between myself and the relentless flow of my thoughts. Mindfulness meditation played a crucial role in this process. Through meditation, I learned to observe my thoughts without getting carried away by them. Instead of identifying with my thoughts, I observed them as separate entities, arising and passing away in the ever-changing stream of consciousness. This mental detachment was crucial for reframing negative thoughts. It allowed me to step back from the emotional intensity and examine their validity more objectively. This wasn't about suppressing negative emotions. Instead, it was about gaining perspective, understanding that my thoughts, while powerful, didn't hold the ultimate authority over my reality. They were simply thoughts, hypotheses, mental models, not unchangeable, immutable laws. One of the first situations where I actively applied this technique was during a tense meeting at work. Previously, similar meetings would trigger a cascade of anxious thoughts. "They're going to criticize my presentation. I'm not prepared enough. I'm going to look foolish." These thoughts would instantly create a physiological response: a racing heart, clammy hands, shortness of breath. This time, however, when the negative thoughts emerged, I consciously labeled them as thoughts, not facts. I acknowledged their presence without engaging with them emotionally. "I'm noticing the thought that I'm going to look foolish," I mentally noted. "But that's just a thought, not a fact. It's not a certainty." This simple act of labeling significantly altered my experience. The physiological response was noticeably less intense. The anxiety didn't vanish completely, but its power was diminished. I was able to focus more effectively on the meeting itself, delivering my presentation with greater confidence and clarity. While I might have felt a slight tremor in my hands, the overwhelming wave of panic that had previously crippled me was absent. Another powerful application of this technique was in managing social situations. In the past, fear of rejection frequently paralyzed me, preventing me from initiating conversations or forming connections with others. The thought, "they won't like me," would loom large, often deterring me from social interactions. But now, equipped with this new tool, I could label that thought as simply that: a thought, not a fact. It was a possibility, not a certainty. Recognizing this changed my approach significantly. I could actively choose to engage, to put myself out there, even in the face of these anxious thoughts. The impact on my personal relationships was remarkable. Disagreements, once fraught with tension and defensiveness, became opportunities for constructive dialogue. Rather than viewing a difference of opinion as a personal attack, I could label the resulting negative thoughts: "They're trying to undermine me. I'm wrong," as just that, thoughts. This allowed me to approach the conflict with greater calm and clarity, fostering more empathy and understanding. Over time, the frequency and intensity of my negative thoughts diminished. This wasn't because I suppressed them, rather, it was because I had changed my relationship with them. They were no longer the unshakable authorities dictating my emotions and actions. They were simply thoughts, transient mental events that I could observe, label, and let go of. The process of consistently labeling thoughts as thoughts, not facts, had a profound impact on my overall sense of well-being. My self-esteem increased significantly. I felt more resilient in the face of setbacks, less prone to self-criticism, and more accepting of my imperfections. The transformation was gradual but tangible, a testament to the power of neuroplasticity and the ability of the human brain to rewire itself, creating new neural pathways that promote emotional regulation and self-acceptance. The old ingrained pathways, once so dominant, were being overwritten by new, more positive patterns. This wasn't simply about intellectual understanding, it was about embodiment. It was about experiencing the tangible shift in physiological response when a potentially anxiety-provoking thought is identified not as a truth, but as a thought, a mental construct. This fundamental shift creates an internal space for more nuanced perspectives to emerge, offering new possibilities and choices in how to respond. The process isn't always easy. There will be moments of relapse, moments when the old patterns resurface with their inherent emotional intensity. But through consistent practice and self-compassion, these moments become opportunities for further refinement, strengthening the new neural pathways and deepening the integration of this powerful technique. The key is to remember that this is a journey, a continuous process of self-discovery and growth, a journey where the destination is as valuable as the path taken to reach it. And every step, every conscious act of labeling, moves me closer to living a life authentically aligned with my values and self-belief. But something still eluded me. I had learned to name my thoughts, but could I learn to let them go? The breakthrough came not in silencing the incessant chatter of my mind, but in learning to observe it, to witness it without judgment. It was a shift from being in the storm to standing on the shore, watching the waves crash and recede. This wasn't about suppressing negative thoughts, it was about creating a spaciousness around them, a mental buffer that prevented them from overwhelming me. Initially, it felt like trying to catch smoke. My thoughts, fueled by years of ingrained anxieties, swirled around me, a chaotic tempest of self-doubt and fear. I'd attempt to grasp a single thought, to analyze it, to dissect it, but it would slip through my fingers, leaving me more frustrated and overwhelmed than before. The key, I eventually realized, wasn't in analyzing the content of the thoughts, but in changing my relationship to the process of thinking itself. This is where mindfulness practices proved invaluable. I began with simple deep breathing exercises, focusing on the sensation of air entering and leaving my body. At first, my mind would race, a relentless train of thought derailing my attempts at concentration. But with patience and persistence, I learned to gently guide my attention back to my breath each time it wandered. It was like training a restless puppy, rewarding the stillness with a sense of calm, gently redirecting it when it strayed. I found a quiet corner in my apartment, a sanctuary free from distractions, where I could dedicate time to these exercises. The soft light filtering through the window, the quiet hum of the city fading into the background, created a space for introspection, a cocoon of peace where I could observe my thoughts without judgment. The setting itself became a ritual, a symbolic representation of my commitment to this internal work. The neuroscience behind this shift began to make sense. Studies have shown that mindfulness practices alter the structure and function of the brain. Regular meditation increases the density of gray matter in areas associated with self-awareness, emotional regulation, and attention. It strengthens the connections between the prefrontal cortex, the executive control center, and the amygdala, the emotional center. This stronger connection allows the prefrontal cortex to exert greater control over emotional impulses, reducing reactivity to negative thoughts and feelings. The process felt akin to sculpting my brain, slowly shaping its neural pathways through repetition and conscious effort. Each mindful breath, each moment of detached observation strengthened the connections responsible for self-regulation and emotional resilience. It wasn't a magical fix, it was a continuous process of rewiring, a gradual reshaping of my inner landscape. I started incorporating mindfulness into my daily routine, not just during meditation. While waiting for the bus, I'd focus on the sensations in my feet, the ground beneath me, the pressure of my shoes. During a tense meeting, I'd notice the tightness in my chest, the clenching of my jaw, and gently allow those sensations to be there, without judgment or resistance. It was a practice of being present, of anchoring myself in the now, preventing the runaway train of thoughts from derailing me into anxiety. There were days when it felt like an uphill battle. Old patterns, deeply ingrained, resisted the new wiring. My thoughts would still surge with emotional intensity, but now I had tools to respond differently. I learned to label them anxiety, fear, self-doubt, and acknowledge their presence without engaging. I might write them down in a journal, but I refused to let them define my reality. Imagine a river flowing downstream. Previously, I had been swept along, a passive passenger tossed about by its current. Now I was learning to stand on the bank, watching its currents, observing its momentum, without being carried away. I was learning to differentiate between the river and myself. I was not the river. This ability to observe my thoughts without judgment extended beyond meditation. A critical comment from a colleague no longer triggered an automatic defensive spiral. I'd notice the thought, "They're judging me," and label it. This simple act created a pause between stimulus and response, giving me the choice to respond more constructively, perhaps even with understanding or compassion. The impact wasn't just emotional, it was physical. The physiological symptoms of anxiety, the racing heart, the shortness of breath, the sweaty palms, decreased significantly. My body mirrored the calm I was cultivating in my mind. This wasn't emotional suppression, it was regulation. A biological feedback loop formed, a reinforcing rhythm between mind and body. That quiet space I had created, once a physical corner of my apartment, became something more, a state of being. It became an internal sanctuary I could access at will, a place of stillness, clarity, and compassion. The process of observing thoughts without judgment wasn't a destination, but a path. There would be moments of clarity and moments of relapse. But the key was consistent, gentle practice. One breath, one moment, one act of conscious attention at a time. It was a journey towards self-mastery, one that honored the mind's capacity to adapt, to change, to heal. But mindfulness alone wasn't enough. Something deeper was waiting to emerge, the ability to name my emotions, not just notice them. The ability to simply label my thoughts rather than react to them proved to be a game changer. It wasn't about ignoring the negative feelings. It was about creating distance, a mental space between the thought and my emotional response. This was akin to watching a movie. I could observe the unfolding drama without becoming emotionally entangled in the storyline. One particularly challenging day at the office, a heated disagreement arose with a colleague, Mark. Mark, usually jovial and collaborative, was unusually aggressive, his criticism sharp and pointed. In the past, such an encounter would have sent my anxiety soaring. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, and I'd find myself spiraling into a defensive, reactive state. This time, however, something was different. As Mark launched into his critique, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the familiar surge of adrenaline. But instead of reacting immediately, I paused. I consciously labeled the emotion anger. Then I observed it, watching it rise and fall like a wave. I didn't fight it, I simply acknowledged its presence. It was remarkable how this simple act of labeling diffused the intensity of the feeling. It was like naming a wild animal. The act of naming it somehow diminished its power. My response to Mark was measured, calm, and surprisingly articulate. I listened to his concerns, acknowledged his perspective, and offered solutions without getting drawn into a tit-for-tat argument. The interaction, which would have previously ended in a tense standoff, concluded with a surprisingly amicable resolution. Both of us felt heard and understood. This was a small victory, but a significant one, a testament to the power of conscious observation and emotional regulation. The impact wasn't limited to the workplace. The ability to label my thoughts and feelings extended into my personal life. An argument with my partner, usually a source of considerable stress, became an opportunity for calm communication and mutual understanding. Rather than becoming swept away by anger or defensiveness, I would pause, label the emotion, frustration, hurt, fear, and approach the situation with greater clarity and empathy. Even seemingly mundane situations benefited from this newfound awareness. Waiting in a long line at the grocery store, the usual simmering frustration was replaced by a sense of detached observation. I would label the feeling impatience. The label itself, the act of naming the emotion, diffused its intensity. The waiting, while still inconvenient, no longer felt like a personal affront. I was able to turn my attention to other things, observing my surroundings, or simply enjoying the quiet solitude. This wasn't a passive process. It required active engagement, constant practice, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. There were times when the old patterns reasserted themselves, when the emotional reactivity returned, flooding my system with anxiety and fear. But each time, I would gently guide myself back to the practice of labeling, reinforcing the new neural pathways, strengthening the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. One evening, while preparing dinner, I accidentally dropped a precious heirloom bowl, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The initial reaction was a surge of overwhelming guilt and despair. But I paused, breathed deeply, and labeled the emotions: sadness, regret, frustration. The intensity of the emotion lessened, allowing me to assess the situation rationally. I cleaned up the mess, calmly, without the usual self-recrimination that would have accompanied such an accident in the past. The experience, once a source of significant emotional distress, became an opportunity for self-compassion and acceptance. As I continued to practice this technique, I found myself experiencing a growing sense of self-efficacy, a newfound belief in my ability to manage my emotional responses. This wasn't about suppressing or ignoring my emotions. It was about creating space, an internal pause, between the stimulus and my reaction. It was about learning to observe my thoughts and feelings as transient phenomena, not immutable facts. This process wasn't solely mental. It had a profound impact on my physical well-being. The physiological symptoms of anxiety, the racing heart, the shortness of breath, the muscle tension, decreased significantly. My sleep improved. My energy levels rose. I found myself experiencing a greater sense of overall well-being. The body, it seemed, responded to the calming influence of the mind. This newfound emotional regulation wasn't a perfect science. There were still times when emotional intensity overwhelmed me, when the old patterns threatened to take over. But the tools I'd developed, the practice of labeling, the cultivation of mindfulness, gave me the resilience to navigate those moments with grace and composure. One particularly challenging situation involved a family gathering. Family gatherings, which once filled me with dread, now presented opportunities to practice my new skills. A heated debate erupted between two relatives, their voices escalating into shouting. In the past, I would have become caught up in the drama, feeling overwhelmed and anxious. This time, I took a deep breath, labeled my feelings as anxiety and discomfort, and chose to remain a calm observer. I focused on my breath, on the sensations in my body, and gently guided my attention back to the present whenever my mind wandered. The situation, though still tense, no longer felt overwhelming. I maintained my composure, even offering words of gentle mediation when appropriate. Over time, the practice of labeling became second nature, almost automatic. It integrated seamlessly into my daily life, shaping not only my emotional responses, but also my relationships, habits, and worldview. What began as a conscious effort became a quiet, reliable inner skill, a tool I could call on any time to return to center. The change wasn't merely behavioral, it was structural. My brain, once dominated by fear-based reactivity, was being reshaped. Its neural pathways were reorganizing to support greater emotional regulation, clarity, and composure. The process of neuroplasticity, once a theory I read in books, had become a living reality, a personal proof of the brain's capacity to change, to adapt, to heal. And it all started with a deceptively simple act: the quiet naming of what I was feeling. That simple pause, that acknowledgement, became a gateway, opening not just to calm, but to agency, to choice, to freedom. It was a revolution within, a transformation that continues to unfold. But as the practice deepened, something unexpected began to surface. A question I hadn't asked myself until then: where had these patterns come from in the first place? The breakthrough wasn't just about labeling individual thoughts, it was about disrupting the entire negative thought cycle. I began to notice patterns, recurring themes in my self-talk that fueled anxiety and self-doubt. It was like uncovering a hidden script, a narrative I'd been unconsciously playing out for years, filled with self-criticism, pessimism, and fear. Once I identified these patterns, I could actively intervene, challenge their validity, reframe their meaning, and ultimately rewrite the script. For instance, I had a persistent belief that I was fundamentally inadequate, a flawed individual destined for failure. This wasn't a single, isolated thought. It was a deeply ingrained belief system that manifested in countless ways. Self-deprecating humor, procrastination, a reluctance to take risks. I started by simply labeling it inadequacy, but labeling alone wasn't enough. I needed to challenge it. I asked myself, what evidence supports this belief? The answer was surprisingly meager. My life, though imperfect, was filled with accomplishments, large and small. I had a loving support system, a career I had built, and a track record of meaningful relationships and personal resilience. This belief wasn't rooted in fact. It was a distortion, a lens tinted by years of unconscious bias and unchecked narrative loops. The next step was reframing. Instead of focusing on perceived shortcomings, I highlighted my strengths and celebrated even the small wins. I created affirmations to counteract the negative self-talk. At first, they felt unnatural, like speaking a foreign language I wasn't fluent in. But as I repeated them again and again, they began to take root. The belief in my inadequacy didn't disappear overnight, but it loosened its grip. What had once felt like absolute truth became just one voice among many, quieter, less convincing, easier to challenge. This process extended to other toxic patterns, like catastrophizing. When I caught myself jumping to worst-case scenarios, I'd pause and label the thought, catastrophizing. Then I'd ask, what is the most likely outcome? What steps can I take to handle this with grace? These small mental pivots weakened the power of fear and made room for more grounded responses. The ripple effect was undeniable. My relationships grew deeper and healthier. I stopped reacting to perceived criticism with defensiveness. Instead, I listened. I responded with curiosity instead of fear. At work, the change was equally tangible. I took on bigger projects. I raised my hand more. The fear of failure, once paralyzing, no longer held the same weight. It had become something I could work with, rather than run from. Of course, the path wasn't linear. Old scripts resurfaced, doubt crept in, but now I had tools, and more importantly, I had evidence that they worked. Each time I used them to regain my footing, I deepened my trust in myself. One evening, in the midst of a high-pressure deadline, I felt that old panic return. I paused, labeled the emotions, stress, fear of failure, and broke the project into smaller tasks. I didn't eliminate the pressure, but I reframed the story. This wasn't a test of worth, it was a challenge I had the resources to meet. And I did. This journey wasn't about erasing negativity, it was about expanding my emotional bandwidth. I wasn't chasing a perfect state, I was building a stronger foundation, one capable of holding joy and fear, growth and setbacks, hope and honesty. The results weren't just mental, they were physical. My energy increased, my sleep deepened. The fog of chronic anxiety began to lift. The invisible weight I'd carried for so long was growing lighter. I continued practicing, repeating affirmations, reframing thoughts, breaking patterns. Not as a chore, but as a ritual, a promise to myself, a practice of conscious evolution, and what started as a daily act of survival had become a way of life. But it was in the stillness of one quiet night, as I reflected on all that had shifted, that a new question emerged, one that felt deeper than anything I had asked so far. If I had unconsciously written one script, what else had I been telling myself all along? The initial weeks were a whirlwind of conscious effort, a constant mental exercise of labeling and reframing. It felt like juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. But gradually, the juggling became smoother, the unicycle steadier. The act of labeling, once a deliberate, almost strained effort, became second nature, an almost automatic response to the rising tide of negative thoughts. Instead of being swept away by the undertow of anxiety, I found myself observing the waves from a safe distance, a detached observer rather than a drowning victim. This mental distance was crucial. It allowed me to analyze the thoughts, to understand their origins, their mechanisms, and most importantly, their power over me, or rather, their lack thereof. The thoughts were still there, but they no longer held the same sway. They were like distant thunder, present but no longer capable of shaking the foundation I had built. One of the most remarkable changes came in my sleep. Before, rest had been elusive, a battleground of racing thoughts and unresolved emotion. I'd toss and turn, trapped in a carousel of worries. Now, sleep came more easily. It was deeper, more restorative. I woke with clarity, with calm, with a kind of readiness I hadn't felt in years. And it wasn't just psychological, my energy increased. The ever-present fatigue that used to fog my mornings began to lift. The transformation spilled over into every part of my life. Conversations deepened. My relationships softened. I could speak without the hum of self-doubt running underneath every word. Arguments were no longer about defending myself, but about understanding others. I listened, not to formulate my next response, but to truly hear. This emotional intelligence began to shape how I engaged with the world. Professionally, everything changed. The fear of failure, once a constant background noise, quieted. I started raising my hand more, taking risks, leaning into challenge rather than recoiling from it. Deadlines became puzzles to solve, not triggers for spirals of panic. The undercurrent of inadequacy that had haunted me for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of self-efficacy. It didn't mean life became easy. Setbacks still came, but my reaction to them transformed. Where I once collapsed into despair or self-judgment, I now responded with curiosity, even compassion. Each challenge became a teacher, a mirror, an opportunity for refinement. One night over dinner, I paused to reflect on the entire journey thus far. I realized something surprising. The goal had never been to eliminate negative thoughts. That's not the nature of the mind. The goal was something much deeper, to create a more balanced inner world. One where even the hardest thoughts could arise and pass without hijacking my identity or dictating my behavior. The shift was massive. I had stopped being the victim of my mind and started becoming its ally. My relationship with the inner critic changed as well. It still spoke, but I had learned to meet it with skepticism and grace. It no longer issued final judgments. It issued suggestions, and I had the choice to accept them or not. The process wasn't linear. Some days I slipped. Sometimes the old voices returned with full force. But I had something I didn't before: tools, perspective, and trust in myself. Each time I found my way back more quickly, more gently. The cumulative effect was profound. Chronic anxiety loosened its grip. My physical health improved. The connection between my emotional life and my body became undeniable. As my inner world calmed, my outer world seemed to open. I moved through life with greater energy, purpose, and peace. These techniques, labeling, reframing, self-affirmation, were no longer just strategies. They were habits, rituals, acts of self-respect. I had hardwired new patterns, carved new neural pathways, and what had started as practice had become presence. Looking back, I saw that the transformation wasn't just cognitive, it was existential. I had changed the way I related to myself, to the world, to life, and I had done it not through dramatic upheaval, but through daily deliberate practice. A quiet revolution, unfolding one mindful moment at a time. The journey, of course, was still unfolding. But as I sat with the stillness of that realization, I felt a new question beginning to form, one that would take the work even deeper. Could I make this transformation last? Not as a phase, but as a way of being. Chapter 5. Sustaining the Transformation. The initial euphoria of my transformation gradually settled into a comfortable rhythm. The constant vigilance of the first few weeks faded, replaced by a quieter, more integrated practice. It was no longer a battle, but a dance, a mindful waltz between my thoughts and my responses. The act of labeling negative thoughts became as natural as breathing, a seamless part of my internal rhythm. This wasn't about suppressing emotions. It was about observing them, understanding them, and responding with awareness and compassion rather than impulse and fear. Consistency became my anchor. Just as a pianist repeats scales to stay sharp, I rehearsed mindfulness in small, deliberate ways each day. Sometimes that meant a few quiet breaths before bed. Other times it meant pausing mid-meeting to reframe a self-doubting thought. It was less about rigid routines and more about infusing presence into the ordinary. Over time, that gentle persistence carved deeper neural grooves, reinforcing pathways of calm, clarity, and choice. Self-affirmation became another powerful tool. But I wasn't reciting sugar-coated mantras. I was choosing statements rooted in truth and grounded in experience. I am learning. I can handle this. I am enough. These phrases, repeated with sincerity, worked like emotional antibiotics against the infection of old inner narratives. They weren't just words, they were a recalibration of identity, a daily reconnection to who I was becoming. I also began to recognize the conditions that made me vulnerable to old thought loops. Certain environments, certain people, even certain times of day had the power to ignite doubt or defensiveness. Instead of fearing these triggers, I treated them as data, clues that could help me plan ahead. If I sensed emotional weather brewing, I could prepare my mental umbrella. This shift from reactivity to preparedness gave me an incredible sense of agency. Journaling remained a helpful companion, especially early on. I documented triggers, patterns, victories, and setbacks. But as the practices became internalized, the need to document them faded. I no longer needed evidence on paper. I could feel the change in my body, in my relationships, in the quiet confidence that had taken root inside me. Still, not every day was seamless. Old patterns didn't vanish. They whispered at the edges of difficult moments, waiting for me to slip. And sometimes I did. But I didn't panic. I no longer treated those moments as failures. I simply noticed, named, and gently brought myself back. The very existence of a return point was evidence of my growth. This shift rippled outward into every area of my life. Conversations were calmer. Arguments became less about defensiveness and more about understanding. I wasn't perfect, but I was more present, more honest, more willing to listen to others and to myself. Professionally, I began to see challenge differently. Risk wasn't something to fear, it was something to evaluate and engage with thoughtfully. Mistakes became feedback. I moved with more courage, more curiosity. Deadlines and criticism no longer sent me spiraling. They sharpened my focus and revealed where I could grow. Physically, the changes were undeniable. My sleep improved, my energy became more consistent. The cloud of chronic fatigue that had hovered over me began to lift. It wasn't magic. It was biology. A calm mind created a healthier body, and that feedback loop fueled itself in the best possible way. And through it all, my relationship with myself softened. I stopped demanding perfection. I started allowing complexity. I stopped performing for worth. I started trusting my own voice. The techniques I'd once treated like tools became more like instincts. No longer something I reached for, they were part of how I walked through the world. This wasn't about being healed. It was about being in relationship, with myself, with the moment, with the process. And for a while it felt like I had crossed a threshold, as if the hard part was over. But one night, unexpectedly, a familiar voice whispered back with surprising strength. An old narrative, sharp, seductive, and sudden. And that's when I realized, even in healing, some ghosts don't knock before they return. The tranquility I'd cultivated felt precarious at times, a fragile ecosystem easily disturbed. The truth was, the journey wasn't a straight line to enlightenment. It was a winding path, punctuated by unexpected detours and the occasional disheartening stumble. Relapses happened. They weren't failures, but rather inevitable checkpoints on the road to lasting transformation. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, the familiar insidious whisper of self-doubt crept back into my consciousness. The old patterns, long suppressed, re-emerged with startling intensity. I found myself caught in a whirlwind of negative self-talk, the familiar spiral of anxiety threatening to pull me under. This wasn't a complete collapse, but a subtle shift, a reminder that the work was ongoing, a constant, gentle tending of the mental garden I'd so painstakingly cultivated. The initial shock gave way to a wave of self-compassion. I didn't berate myself for this setback. Instead, I treated it as a valuable lesson, an opportunity to reinforce my newly acquired coping mechanisms. I acknowledged the feelings, labeling them as just thoughts, not absolute truths. I gently redirected my attention to my breath, focusing on the present moment, anchoring myself in the stillness. The relapse served as a powerful reminder of the importance of consistency. It highlighted the fact that neuroplasticity wasn't a destination, but a journey, a continuous process of refinement and adaptation. It underscored the need for ongoing vigilance, a consistent commitment to the practices that had helped me establish a more positive mental state. I returned to my daily routines with renewed dedication, doubling down on my self-affirmations, meditation practice, and mindful self-talk. I revisited my journal not to dwell on the setback, but to analyze the circumstances that triggered it. Identifying potential patterns or vulnerabilities, one of the crucial insights I gained from these experiences was the importance of self-compassion. I realized that beating myself up over setbacks only exacerbated the problem, perpetuating the negative cycle. Self-compassion, on the other hand, allowed me to treat myself with the same kindness and understanding I would offer a friend struggling with similar challenges. This approach shifted the focus from self-criticism to self-support, creating a more nurturing and supportive internal environment. I started treating setbacks as opportunities for growth, viewing them as valuable feedback rather than personal failures. This shift in perspective fundamentally altered my relationship with adversity. Another key element in navigating relapses was the cultivation of self-awareness. I began to recognize the subtle warning signs that preceded a relapse, the subtle shifts in mood, the creeping negativity, the increase in physical tension. By identifying these early warning signals, I was able to intervene proactively, implementing my coping mechanisms before the negative thoughts gained momentum. This proactive approach prevented minor setbacks from escalating into full-blown relapses. It was like having an early warning system for my mind, allowing me to address potential problems before they spiraled out of control. My social support system also played a crucial role in navigating these challenging moments. I reached out to friends and family, sharing my struggles and seeking their support. Their understanding and empathy provided invaluable encouragement, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this journey. These connections acted as a buffer against the isolating effects of negative self-talk, providing a sense of community and belonging. Open communication about my challenges helped dispel any feelings of shame or embarrassment, transforming what could have been isolating experiences into opportunities for connection and support. Over time, the frequency and intensity of relapses diminished. The tools I had developed became more deeply ingrained, my responses more automatic and less reactive. The process became less about consciously applying techniques and more about integrating them into the very fabric of my being. It became second nature, an effortless flow of mindful self-awareness, a quiet, persistent current of self-compassion that gently guided me through challenging moments. One unexpected benefit of experiencing relapses was a deeper understanding of the nature of neuroplasticity itself. It reinforced the understanding that this was a dynamic, ongoing process, not a one-time fix. The setbacks served as reminders that progress isn't always linear, that there will be ups and downs, forward and backward movements in the journey of self-improvement. This understanding helped me to accept the inevitable ebbs and flows of the process, preventing disappointment and fostering a more resilient approach to my overall well-being. The relapses also highlighted the importance of ongoing self-reflection. I continued to journal, meticulously documenting my experiences, analyzing patterns and identifying triggers. The entries became less focused on the mechanics of the techniques and more on the emotional and psychological landscape of my inner world. The process became more introspective, more focused on understanding my own mental processes and emotional responses, enabling me to navigate future challenges with greater skill and self-awareness. Furthermore, I incorporated a regular review of my self-affirmations, refining them as my sense of self evolved. What resonated deeply in the early stages of my journey might not have felt as authentic or empowering later on. This continuous process of refinement ensured that my self-statements remained aligned with my evolving sense of self, providing continued support and encouragement. This ongoing review process mirrored the continuous adaptation of the brain itself, reflecting the dynamic nature of neuroplasticity. Beyond the individual techniques, my overall approach shifted from a rigid adherence to a structured program to a more fluid, adaptive strategy. I realized that the specific methods were less important than the underlying principles of self-awareness, self-compassion, and consistent self-care. This realization freed me from the pressure of rigidly adhering to a specific protocol, allowing me to flexibly apply the principles in various ways, depending on the situation and my individual needs. The journey toward lasting transformation is not a race, but a marathon. Relapses are not failures, but opportunities to strengthen our resolve, refine our approach, and deepen our understanding of our own inner landscape. The key lies in our ability to navigate these setbacks with self-compassion, perseverance, and a commitment to consistent self-care. By embracing the inevitable challenges, we can cultivate a deeper, more resilient sense of self, paving the way for a more fulfilling and meaningful life. The journey itself becomes a testament to the remarkable capacity of the human brain to adapt, evolve, and heal. The ongoing practice isn't merely about conquering negativity. It's about building a life characterized by resilience, self-acceptance, and the ongoing pursuit of self-discovery. And that, in itself, is a journey worth taking. The process continues, a lifelong commitment to self-growth and the exploration of my own inner world, a journey that will likely bring both triumph and setbacks, but a journey that ultimately shapes me into the person I am meant to be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, subtly, quietly, beneath the surface. I didn't yet understand the full extent of the change, but I was about to find out. The following months became a testament to the enduring power of neuroplasticity. My ability to navigate stressful situations improved dramatically. What once triggered panic attacks now elicited a measured response. A looming deadline at work, previously a source of crippling anxiety, now spurred a focused, calm determination. Instead of succumbing to the pressure, I found myself employing the techniques almost unconsciously, labeling anxious thoughts as mere thoughts, reminding myself of my strengths with carefully chosen self-affirmations, and anchoring myself in the present moment through deep, mindful breaths. One particularly challenging instance involved a heated disagreement with a colleague. In the past, such confrontations would have left me reeling, consumed by self-doubt and negative self-talk for days. This time, however, the experience felt profoundly different. While the initial tension was undeniable, the familiar cascade of negativity failed to materialize. I observed my own reactions, acknowledging the anger and frustration without judgment. I reframed the situation, reminding myself that disagreements are a natural part of professional life and didn't reflect my inherent worth. The conversation concluded, not with resentment, but with a surprisingly amicable understanding. The entire episode felt like a controlled experiment, a real-world demonstration of my newly cultivated emotional resilience. The change wasn't just limited to professional settings. My personal relationships flourished. The same self-compassion I extended to myself permeated my interactions with others. I found myself more patient, more understanding, and more empathetic. I approached conflicts with a sense of curiosity rather than defensiveness, willing to understand others' perspectives even when they differed from my own. This increased emotional intelligence significantly deepened my connections with loved ones, transforming previously strained relationships into sources of strength and support. Even seemingly mundane tasks, once sources of irritation, now held a different quality. The daily commute, previously a breeding ground for frustration, transformed into a meditative practice. I found myself appreciating the small details, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the sounds of the city, the quiet moments of reflection. These mindful observations subtly shifted my perspective, replacing feelings of annoyance with a sense of appreciation and calm. This mindful approach extended to other aspects of my life, imbuing even the most routine activities with a sense of presence and purpose. The long-term benefits of this transformation extended far beyond managing stress and improving relationships. My physical health improved significantly. The chronic tension I'd carried in my shoulders and neck gradually dissipated, replaced by a sense of ease and relaxation. My sleep improved dramatically, the restless nights plagued by anxiety becoming a distant memory. This overall sense of well-being had a profound impact on my physical health. I felt more energetic, more focused, and more alive. The process of rewiring my brain wasn't merely a matter of intellectual understanding. It became a deeply embodied experience. The techniques I'd learned were no longer abstract concepts, but integral parts of my being, shaping my thoughts, emotions, and actions in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The transformation was holistic, encompassing every aspect of my life, my work, relationships, physical health, and overall sense of well-being. This integrated approach was key to the lasting nature of the change. One evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey. I realized that the initial 3-day protocol had served as a catalyst, igniting a process that continued to unfold organically. The techniques had become less about deliberate application and more about intuitive integration. It was as if my brain had developed a new, more efficient operating system, capable of handling stressful situations with grace and composure. This was the true essence of sustained transformation, the seamless integration of new neural pathways into the very fabric of my being. Looking back, the panic attack that had initially propelled me onto this path felt both distant and profoundly significant. It served as a wake-up call, a catalyst that forced me to confront long-standing patterns of self-doubt and negativity. The journey had been challenging, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt. But it was precisely those challenges that had strengthened my resolve, deepening my understanding of neuroplasticity and honing my ability to navigate the complexities of the human mind. The most significant realization was the profound impact of self-compassion. It wasn't a weakness, but a source of strength, providing the emotional resilience necessary to weather setbacks and keep moving forward. The ability to treat myself with kindness, even in the face of failure, proved to be invaluable. This self-compassion extended beyond myself, enhancing my relationships and fostering a greater sense of empathy towards others. It created a ripple effect of positive change, influencing all aspects of my life. I understood that the work was far from over. This wasn't a destination, but a journey of continuous growth and refinement. Neuroplasticity, I learned, was a lifelong process, a testament to the brain's incredible capacity to adapt and evolve. The ongoing practice of self-awareness, mindful self-talk, and self-compassion became a cornerstone of my life, a commitment to continuous self-improvement and personal growth. It was an ongoing conversation with myself, a constant exploration of my inner landscape, a process that brought me a deeper understanding of my own strengths, limitations, and potential. The sustained transformation wasn't merely about eradicating negativity. It was about cultivating a life characterized by resilience, self-acceptance, and an unwavering commitment to personal growth. It was about building a foundation of inner peace that enabled me to navigate the inevitable challenges of life with greater ease, grace, and composure. It was a journey of continuous discovery, an unfolding process of becoming the best version of myself, a journey that, while demanding, was profoundly rewarding. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit and the remarkable plasticity of the human brain. And it was a journey I embraced with gratitude, knowing that the path forward, however winding, would continue to lead me towards a richer, more fulfilling life. But I hadn't anticipated what would happen next, how this personal evolution would ripple outward and begin to transform the lives of others. It started with a single conversation that changed everything. The transformation wasn't just a personal victory, it became a calling. The profound shift in my own well-being ignited a desire to share my journey, to help others navigate the labyrinthine pathways of their own minds. I started small, sharing my experiences with close friends and family, cautiously revealing the techniques that had revolutionized my life. Their responses were overwhelmingly positive, a mixture of awe, skepticism, and a palpable yearning for similar transformation. These early conversations, hesitant at first, blossomed into something truly remarkable, a community of shared experience and mutual support. One friend, Sarah, a high-powered lawyer grappling with crippling anxiety and burnout, became an early beneficiary of my newfound knowledge. She, too, had experienced moments of intense panic, feelings of inadequacy, and a relentless cycle of negative self-talk. Her initial skepticism quickly melted away as we delved into the science behind neuroplasticity, discussing the practical application of the 3-day protocol and the importance of self-compassion. We met regularly, sharing our progress, celebrating small victories, and offering encouragement during setbacks. Her transformation mirrored my own, albeit with its own unique challenges and triumphs. Witnessing her progress, seeing her reclaim her life and rediscover her passion, solidified my belief in the power of shared experience and the transformative potential of neuroplasticity. Word of my journey spread organically, propelled by the authentic testimonies of those whose lives had been touched by the principles I shared. Soon I found myself surrounded by a network of individuals, all seeking similar transformation. Some were grappling with anxiety and depression, others battling self-doubt and low self-esteem. They represented a diverse tapestry of backgrounds, professions, and life experiences, united by their shared desire for a more fulfilling and meaningful existence. This organically formed community became a crucible for personal growth. We shared our vulnerabilities, our struggles, and our triumphs without judgment or reservation. Each individual's story, unique in its details, underscored the universality of the human experience. The common thread of striving for self-improvement, battling internal demons, and yearning for a life filled with purpose and joy. This shared vulnerability fostered an environment of deep empathy and understanding. We learned from each other's mistakes, celebrated each other's victories, and provided unwavering support during moments of despair. Our meetings weren't simply about sharing techniques, they were about fostering a sense of belonging, a shared journey towards self-discovery. We created a space where vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a source of strength, where imperfections were embraced, and where genuine connection transcended the superficialities of everyday life. The sense of community proved to be an indispensable ingredient in the transformation process. The shared experience of struggle and triumph created a powerful sense of solidarity, reminding us that we were not alone in our challenges. The mutual support we provided fueled our individual journeys, offering encouragement, accountability, and a sense of shared purpose. One particularly memorable instance involved Mark, a middle-aged executive who had experienced severe burnout. He arrived at our first meeting, shrouded in a palpable weariness, his eyes devoid of the spark I had seen in others. His story was one of relentless work, mounting pressure, and a profound sense of isolation. He initially resisted the idea of self-compassion, viewing it as weakness. However, as he witnessed the positive impact of these methods on others within the group, he slowly began to open up. He cautiously started practicing self-affirmations, first hesitantly, then with growing conviction. The transformation was gradual but profound. The initially cynical and weary executive gradually transformed into someone who exuded a quiet confidence and a newfound sense of self-worth. The community I fostered wasn't just a support group, it became a living testament to the power of shared experience and the transformative potential of neuroplasticity. We learned from each other's successes and failures, offering encouragement, understanding, and accountability. The collective wisdom we generated was far greater than the sum of its parts. It was a testament to the human spirit's inherent capacity for resilience, growth, and connection. My role evolved beyond that of a mere mentor. I became a facilitator, guiding others on their own unique paths to self-discovery. I focused on creating a safe space where vulnerability was celebrated, not condemned. This emphasis on fostering genuine connection, on building a supportive community, proved to be an indispensable component of lasting transformation. The journey wasn't always easy. There were moments of frustration, setbacks, and even feelings of inadequacy within the group. But it was these challenges, the shared struggles, the collective triumphs, that deepened our bond and reinforced our commitment to mutual support. We learned that growth, like life itself, was a messy and often unpredictable process. We learned to embrace those imperfections, accepting setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth. Over time, the group became more than just a collection of individuals seeking personal transformation. It evolved into a vibrant ecosystem of mutual support and shared growth. We exchanged strategies, celebrated milestones, offered solace during setbacks, and recognized each other's unique strengths. The experience underscored the vital importance of community and shared experience in the journey of self-discovery and personal evolution. The impact extended far beyond our initial meetings. Members of the group formed their own support networks, creating smaller circles based on specific needs and shared experiences. The ripple effect of this shared knowledge and mutual support continued to expand, demonstrating the potent potential of a community dedicated to personal growth and empowerment. The journey of self-transformation, while deeply personal, was not a solitary one. It was a collective undertaking, amplified by the power of shared experience and unwavering support. What began as a personal quest for self-improvement had morphed into something far greater: a movement, a living network dedicated to the transformative power of neuroplasticity. The ongoing support and shared experiences fostered a cycle of continuous growth and improvement, reinforcing the belief in our collective capacity for change and the enduring power of the human spirit. This journey, both personal and communal, served as a profound reminder of the interconnectedness of human experience and the transformative potential of shared vulnerability and mutual support. The journey was far from over, but the destination, a life characterized by resilience, self-compassion, and a deep sense of connection, was increasingly clear. And yet, even with all we had built, there remained one question that lingered, unspoken but urgent. Could this fragile ecosystem of growth survive the moment it was truly tested? The final embers of the sunset cast long shadows across my study, painting the walls in hues of orange and purple. The day had been long, filled with the echoes of laughter and shared stories, the quiet intensity of breakthroughs, and the comforting weight of shared vulnerability. As I sat alone, the quiet hum of the city a distant murmur. A profound sense of contentment settled over me. The journey hadn't been easy, far from it. There were moments of doubt, of setbacks, of the gnawing fear that the progress we'd made was fragile, ephemeral. But the strength of the community, the unwavering support, the shared experiences of struggle and triumph had forged something remarkable. A lasting transformation, not just for me, but for everyone involved. Looking back, I could see the clear trajectory of our collective journey. From hesitant beginnings, filled with skepticism and self-doubt, we had evolved into a vibrant community, united by a shared purpose and a belief in the transformative power of neuroplasticity. The 3-day protocol, initially a structured framework, had organically morphed into a personalized approach, tailored to each individual's unique needs and challenges. The core principles, the power of second-person self-talk, the creation of identity-based statements, and the labeling of negative thoughts remained constant, but their application became increasingly nuanced, refined by experience and shaped by individual insights. The success of the protocol wasn't simply about the techniques themselves, it was about the context in which they were applied, the supportive environment we had fostered, the shared vulnerability, the mutual encouragement. These were the indispensable ingredients that catalyzed lasting change. We learned that true transformation was not a solitary endeavor. It was a collective journey, fueled by the strength of shared experience and the power of community. The group became a microcosm of human resilience, a living testament to the capacity for growth, healing, and transformation. Sarah, for instance, continued to thrive. Her initial anxiety had been replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense of empowerment that radiated from her. She tackled her cases with renewed vigor, her legal acumen sharpened by her improved mental clarity and emotional resilience. She credits the self-compassion exercises, acknowledging that accepting her vulnerabilities, rather than fighting them, had been a crucial turning point. Her story became a source of inspiration for others within the group, a beacon of hope reminding them that transformation was not only possible, but attainable. Mark, the weary executive, had found a new passion. He transitioned from a high-pressure corporate role to a position that allowed him to utilize his skills in a more fulfilling and sustainable way. He actively embraced self-compassion, using it as a foundation for improved relationships and a renewed appreciation for his own well-being. His story was a powerful reminder of the potential for transformation, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. The deep-seated weariness that had once consumed him was replaced by a calm strength, a sense of purpose that emanated from a genuine place of self-acceptance. Each individual's story was unique, a tapestry woven with threads of struggle, triumph, and profound personal growth. Yet the common thread that bound them together was the transformative power of neuroplasticity, harnessed and amplified by the strength of community. Their journeys underscored the universality of the human experience, the shared desire for self-improvement, the inherent capacity for resilience, and the profound impact of mutual support. The book you're holding, the narrative you've been following, isn't just a collection of techniques and scientific explanations. It's a testament to the human spirit's incredible capacity for transformation, a celebration of resilience, and a guide to unlocking your own inner potential. The science of neuroplasticity provides the framework, the tools, the understanding. But it's the human element, the connection, the shared experience, the unwavering support, that makes the transformation not only possible, but profoundly meaningful. The journey is not a race, it's a marathon. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and challenges that test your resilience. But remember the lessons learned, the transformations witnessed, the power of self-compassion, and the unwavering support of a community. Embrace the imperfections, celebrate the small victories, and never underestimate the power of your own mind to heal, grow, and transform. This isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The techniques described are not a quick fix, a magic bullet. They are tools, powerful tools, capable of reshaping your neural pathways, fostering emotional resilience, and unlocking a profound sense of well-being. But their effectiveness is amplified by self-awareness, self-compassion, and the unwavering support of others. The journey of self-discovery, the process of rewiring your brain, is a personal one, unique to each individual. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. The 3-day protocol serves as a framework, a starting point. Feel free to adapt it, modify it, personalize it to fit your own needs and circumstances. The most important aspect is consistency, the daily practice of self-compassion, the persistent cultivation of positive self-talk, the conscious effort to reframe negative thoughts. Remember the power of second-person self-talk, the gentle encouragement, the empathetic voice that speaks to you with kindness and understanding. Practice those identity-based statements, affirming your strengths, your capabilities, your inherent worth. And when those negative thoughts creep in, when self-doubt begins to whisper, remember to label them as thoughts, not facts. Observe them without judgment, acknowledging their presence without letting them dictate your reality. The community you create, whether in person or online, will play a vital role in your journey. Share your experiences, celebrate your successes, and seek support during setbacks. Remember that you are not alone. The collective wisdom, the shared vulnerability, the mutual encouragement, these are essential ingredients in the transformative process. And finally, remember to be patient with yourself. Transformation is a journey, not a destination. It's a process of gradual, incremental change, punctuated by moments of profound insight and breakthroughs. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the small victories, and never underestimate the power of your own resilience. You have within you the capacity to create lasting change, to rewire your brain for greater well-being, to live a life filled with purpose, joy, and a profound sense of self-worth. The journey begins with you, with a single step, a single breath, a single act of self-compassion. Take that step, embrace the journey, your transformation awaits. The power to change your life, to rewire your brain for a more fulfilling existence, lies within you. Believe in yourself and embrace the journey. The world is waiting to see what you create. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Sincerely grateful.